Welcome to the Intrinsically Ordered podcast. Today I'm joined by Jared from Heliocentric, also known as Atheist Church Audit, talking religion. We're going to be talking about rad trad Catholicism. We're going to be talking about content creation and everything in between. Welcome to the show, Jared.
Cade, thanks so much for having me, man. I am a recent and big fan.
Let's go. You gotta have like some palm branches throughout the episode to wave towards me.
Hosanna, Cade!
I'll steal a donkey of sorts and then write a passage about how okay it is to steal donkeys when it's useful.
Dang, is that what happened in that passage?
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to go back and reread that.
And take a donkey is essentially, unless I'm misremembering all of my Bible readings, where they literally just yoink a donkey from somebody's yard for the Messiah.
I just kind of always assumed that they bartered for it, but maybe not. Damn.
Run a quick intro on what you do, and I'm gonna Google this right now. We're going to the Book of Matthew off screen while you run the intro.
Hey, my name is Jared. I run a YouTube channel called Heliocentric, and the series that I do on that channel is called Atheist Church Audit. So I'm an atheist. I'm a former Pentecostal evangelical. I'm a former street preacher and a chaplain and a worship leader. And in spite of all that, I still love going to churches and exploring religion and talking to the faithful, and it's really fun.
That is
and
awesome.
I also make metal music.
And metal music.
Yeah.
So I pulled up Book of Matthew, chapter 21. Now when they drew near to Jerusalem and came by the mount, where did this just go? Then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them at once." This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, it's fine. There's a donkey somewhere, and take it. Yeah.
That's crazy. I've read past that all my life. Damn.
It'd be a felony in some states if the donkey's worth over $2,000.
The more you know.
The more you know. Yeah, not a good idea to steal things and say that the Lord gave it to you. Yeah. So let's dive in. You recently put out a video attending your first Latin Mass. You had said that this is one of your most requested videos, and boy, do traditional Catholics have like a corner in a very large slice of the pie on internet discourse.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that when people join traditional Catholicism, they are gifted a podcast microphone at their baptism and a video camera, because I keep track of the Catholic content sphere, and every day I would find all of these sub 1,000 subscriber channels, and I've just never gotten to the end of how many channels are out there and the number of commenters and the amount of content. Tell us about going to dealing with rad trads and going to one of their supposedly amazing, lovely services.
So just to clarify, though, I mean, with all those sub 1,000 subscriber channels that you're finding, they're all just, hey, I've been Catholic for 10 minutes now, let's talk about it. Interesting.
Yeah, I did a public debate with a guy who'd been Catholic all of, he wasn't actually initiated into the church yet. When he runs a 70,000, between platforms, it's close to 100,000 follower platform doing Catholic apologetics, and started that before he finished RCIA to hop into the church. It is a just flip. People will flip immediately and then start making content. And that's one of my critiques of the rad trad world, is that out of the influencers for specifically the rad trad movement, north of 80% of the influencers are all converts. There are almost no homegrown traditional Catholic influencers, which strikes me as odd for a number of reasons. But yeah, most of the rad trad online discourse is ran by converts of many stripes, which makes it zealous and also has this kind of myopic view of what the faith is, that even kind of the cradle or mainstream Catholics have critiques of. But I'm sure you've interacted with all sorts of rad trads in your comment sections.
Less in my comment sections. I find myself reading the comments less and less these days. But yeah, more so over DMs. I'm friends with a couple of rad trad Instagram channels. And yeah, I think that the two that I have in mind are both converts, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Which there's a fascinating discussion there because this is my first time exploring a TLM mass or TLM, but then I've done much more exploration of the Orthodox world, and they're kind of similar in a lot of ways. Like if you were to just take a picture of both chapels, they're going to look very similar, both obviously high church, but yeah, I mean the Orthodox treat things in such a categorically different way than most Catholics, even most Catholic priests that I talk to. There's an emphasis on mystery that I candidly really like, and so. But this same phenomenon of like there being a huge influx of the Orthodox, and then I haven't heard much about a huge influx of Catholics. But now that you're raising it to my attention, like no, it's sorry about that.
We're back.
We're back.
Now that you're raising it to my attention is the last thing I heard.
Oh, sorry. But now that you're bringing it to my attention that that it's not just Catholics, it's traditional Catholics that are having a big rise in popularity. Mm-hmm. That makes a lot more sense to me. And so I feel like they're almost two sides of the same coin, and maybe they attract slightly different people, but a lot of the same kind of emotional yearnings tend to be the same. Yeah. So in your experience, would you say that it's a lot of former evangelicals who are becoming rad trads?
Yeah, most of the big converts, and if you talk and go to like a young Gen Z traditional Catholic meetup, it's a lot of Protestants where in so much, especially of online Catholic apologetics, is specifically against Protestants. Now, they're not a fan of atheists, and they try to engage with atheists, but most of the time it's this like internal critique of Christianity where they see Protestantism as untenable, as a reliable way for like the church to perpetuate, and then they kind of go like, maybe your evangelical church doesn't perfectly match up to the church fathers, ergo Catholicism, but it's still in this false dichotomy in which you either have low church, mega church Protestants,
right,
or you have Catholics, and most of these people, they skip over even looking at the Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah.
And they just assume that the only church that takes the early church seriously is traditional Catholicism, which is a weird dichotomy to put up, because when you're informing if you're informing somebody about a new worldview, then you're the only source of that new worldview, and it's much harder to find counter apologetics. And the Eastern Orthodox are big on like conservatism as like the draw, but they're not as good as fighting the Catholics as the Catholics are against fighting the Eastern Orthodox. So it's like this weird content sphere, and because there's such a well-developed traditional Catholic media empire where you have like the thought leaders, which are like a handful of like Catholic Answers apologists who kind of like workshop and come up with the arguments, but then you have like 5 layers deep of other and smaller channels and niche channels that are kind of taking notes from the mothership on what arguments to make. So these sets of arguments from the top get disseminated across hundreds of channels, and there is so much content out there that Catholics kind of win by the sheer volume game in the new internet discourse.
That is so fascinating.
And the bishops hate it, for the record. A lot of like American bishops of the mainstream Catholic Church have a lot of meetings, essentially how to deal with this, because it's these young, zealous, traditional Catholics that come in. They have this myopic view of the faith. And I remember this myself. I both knew my priest and the bishop, and it was like, we have this tradition to uphold. I'm young, I'm zealous, I'm on fire. I can only conceive of things insofar as like the content sphere has dictated liturgy. And so it's oftentimes these rad trads that are like a pain in the neck for even these bishops at large, and bishops have these talks about how to deal with this new top-heavy myopic kind of view, but very zealous and on fire because they can't condemn traditional Catholicism because it's part of Catholicism. So they have to do kind of this like judo with the younger conservative Catholics in the diocese, where they have to like the fact that they're punching and they're zealous, but they have to kind of like figure out a way to redirect that while also keeping the older, more liberal generations happy as well. So it's like this weird PR game that they have to play.
That's totally fair. And I mean, I have to wonder how much of it is, just young men kind of getting wrapped up in a wave of conservatism, period. And then it seems like the Catholic Church is like the most logical conclusion of that. It's the precipice of, being young and conservative. And then, to their shame, I'll say that like some of the Catholic Instagram pages that I follow, like some of the rad trad pages that I follow, a lot of times it feels like it has so little to do with Catholicism. Like I'll see them make these weird posts that are like, modern women versus traditional women. And it's like, that's just fetishizing like a certain type of woman. Like, I don't know. It's not like, I don't know. It's not, prioritizing modesty even. It's like sexualizing this motif of like the home on the prairie kind of vibe, right?
It's very much an aesthetic that never existed. Rad trads like and have this between the imagery and the content and how they dress and the things that they like as old-timey. It's this weird thing where they like want to wind back the clock, but only on certain issues. And so they can do this like giant Texas sharpshooter fallacy where they're like pulling from so many different angles, where like the 1940s weren't this bastion of Catholic orthodoxy, where like the rates of promiscuity or divorce, like all of these like hot button culture war issues weren't perfect during the 40s, and the 40s aren't this like perfect era. But then they get to like pull part of the aesthetic from that, like that old-timey dress and the cigars and like the vibes. But then they get to like import like this medieval element to it on top of this like American Protestant conception of the 40s.
Right.
And then they get to like superimpose this new evangelism like intellectual tradition on top of this like JP2 era theology of the body. In the 80s, like we have the solution to the modern world. And then they get to like use science when they like it on birth control, but then they don't admit all of the science. And so it's this weird trying to fit everything into the crosshairs for a reality that has never existed. And it's so big on the vibes and the politics versus it seems like the Orthodox folks tend to be a little bit more heavy on like the Jesus thing. The rad trads tend to be a little bit more heavy on the like 1940s traditionally masculine nuclear family with like a superimposition of like some Vatican vibes on top. And then like Jesus is cool, but he's ultimately a really awesome bludgeoning tool, because when you get to be conservative, you can condemn the other side, not just for being wrong or for having different information, but like you have this gravitas to your condemnation now. It's not just wrong. It's not like we just don't like liberalism. It's that like we can condemn it with the full might and force of a divine creator and this incredible like meta narrative around the sexual revolution. It's no longer a pragmatic concern. It's like everything is at stakes, and so you feel justified in these grand emotions and narratives around what are nuanced and complicated topics.
Yeah, man. Even as an atheist now, generally speaking, the strands of Christianity that I tend to like are the ones that prioritize Jesus, which is weird to say. But yeah, I have much less respect for Christians who use the cross as a hammer.
What did you make of actually attending a Latin Mass?
It was fine. Like all the things that rad trads say about the Latin Mass is true. It is this, beautiful representation of a very old liturgy, right? I mean, it's there was a guy there who watched my channel and approached me, really sweet guy, and he was explaining that like the the mass that was codified into, law at the Council of Trent probably has more similarities to like a 12th century or a 13th century mass. And so it's kind of stamped in time from that era, and you can see it, you can hear it. It's really beautiful to hear, man, we're a part of this 1,000-year legacy. We've been doing it the same way for this long, and it's really cool. But I get that same thing with the Orthodox Church. I get the same thing with like other denominations. I've visited the Coptic Orthodox, right? And I mean, their liturgy and mass is probably even older than the 12th century. So, it's not exclusively, old or ancient. But I'll concede, like, yeah, no, it is super cool, and I think that people should check it out. But it felt, just comparing how eager people were to get me in the door of a TLM, and then the actual like experience of being there, like, yeah, it is beautiful, but it felt like the desire to have me there came from a place of myopathy, where like, yeah, it's like, oh man, this is the thing. There's nothing else like this in the whole wide world. And it's like, no, man, that's not the case. And so, yeah, I'm happy that people are proud of their traditions. I'm happy that people are, find beauty in them and are eager to share them. But when it makes you arrogant, when you've been doing this for 10 minutes and you feel like, oh man, I've got a leg up on the rest of the Christian world, or even the rest of the Catholic Church, that feels icky.
It is very much a myopic view of religion, because you have these like Protestant converts that have only seen either a low church or like a liberal high church, and then they often, as the narrative goes, they see someone who they go to a local Catholic church, and the pastor talks about things like love and empathy and like reading the gospel, and like it's almost like too similar to their background, and then they step into their door and see a Latin Mass. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody can admit, like, going to a Latin Mass feels like you're stepping into another world.
Yeah.
Like, there is nothing in daily life or politics that you would see anything like that for the average person. Mm-hmm. But I think, to your point, once you expand the liturgical horizons and realize that, like, antiquity and tradition and reverence are not exclusive, if you expand your horizons, mm-hmm. the Latin Mass doesn't seem unique. But if your background's only modern conceptions of liturgy, it is very much
right.
like, this is something very different, but you're unaware that there are a lot of things that are very different if you have spent time in this space.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the first comments that popped up on that video was like, yes, I've been waiting this for the glory of Rome. And I was holding myself back because I wanted to respond to this guy and say, like, fuck Rome, fuck the glory of Rome. You're supposed to care about the glory of Christ, because at least Christ is, supposed to be the accumulation, the final frontier of all things perfect. He is the image of the invisible God. And so if people are really, hyped up on Jesus, and their conception of Jesus is all things that are good, and you want to ascribe glory to that, awesome, wonderful. Like, but when you're really excited about the institution, if it's like, well, but the institution is co-signed by Christ, fine, but it doesn't sound like you're excited about Christ. It sounds like you're excited about the institution.
So where Catholics love to do this apologetic, where they love the church because Christ established it, and the saints aren't a distraction from Christ because we're praying through them.
Right.
And the aesthetics and the liturgy are all meant to point us towards Christ, is like the apologetics that you're supposed to say, that Catholics always love trotting out. But in a very like Jordan Peterson type of way, there's like what you say, and then there's what you do. And like in practice, Catholics spend way more time worrying about like what prophecy and novena from what saint in what century had this thing revealed to them, versus like just doing Lectio Divina in the Bible.
Yeah.
And the liturgy, even though it's said to point towards Christ and ad orientem, we're facing east, and we're facing with the priest, and the liturgy is there to like orient us towards God. In practice, it often becomes like this huge liturgical fanfare that people are bickering over who gets to serve what role, and then they're worried about that their priest did he have his fingers like this with the Eucharist, or did he have them like this, or was he just like this? Like, how was his fingers? And like in practice, that ends up distracting. Or this like Christ established the church, and that's why we like it. Often in practice, it does become this like fetishization of a mix between Roman ideals plus this like high medieval plus this. It's just like the aesthetics. I think in many ways Catholics like to be ornate, both with their churches and their theology and their history, and it's often meant to inspire beauty, to lead with the transcendentals, and then what they end up doing is spending time making things ornate and not focusing on why they have these things that are ornate, often in practice.
No, that's super well said. Yeah, it feels like missing the forest for the trees sometimes.
Yeah.
And again, this is a world that I've explored very little of. And I also feel bad because like I know that there's going to be at least one rad trad who's watching this, and they're going to be like, no, the reason why I was attracted to it is because it was all about Jesus. Like in my theological background, it was all about loving your neighbor. And I never heard anything about the Sermon on the Mount or, Christ as the Lamb of God. So, it sucks because you can only talk about trends and averages. But yeah, there does seem to be some level of through-lineness to it all, right?
When it also comes down to age, where I think when a rad trad convert tells you like it's all about Jesus and like insert all of these apologetics, I don't think it's a lie. I don't think it's disingenuous, but it's oftentimes the people that are like just through the conversion stage. And I remember when I was becoming a rad trad, I would see these articles about how toxic trad communities are and how insert these critiques. And I genuinely was like, I don't get where these critiques are coming from because my only experience has been great and these people love Jesus. And then it wasn't until, but at that time, I would attend the Latin Mass on the weekends and attend my local Catholic Church youth group during the days. And so I never really like spent time with these families at the trad community. And my only interaction were the Sunday best. And when a group knows that you're converting or new, like they put on the show. But then it's like after a few years, even the most zealous trad converts tend to start seeing where the criticisms are coming from and start seeing like maybe there are problems in the trad community. It's like new shiny. It's like when you get a Christmas gift and it's like the best thing ever. And then like 6 months later, like it's died down. It's not that you don't like it. It's just that like you kind of know how to place that thing in your life. And so I often find like with rad trad converts, you can kind of guess how long they've been in based off of how they're talking about things.
That's really insightful. So let me ask about your story, because I kind of know your backstory, but not a ton. So you grew up kind of nominal Catholic, like your family was nominally Catholic, and then you got radicalized into rad trad stuff? I shouldn't say radicalized for the rad trads who hate watching this. I'm not trying to say it as a cuss
I use
word.
that word and step on the landmine all the time, and they hate it. It's education from a formal institution with things that you're already having to believe, aka radicalization. But yeah, I was raised in a mildly Catholic household. That's sort of like a moralistic therapeutic deism that conservatives always like to harp on, where I attended a Catholic parish and we'd go to church most weekends. And my mom was Catholic. My dad was Lutheran-ish, but wanted us raised Catholics because a lot of, especially in the Midwest, like the Catholic schools are really great. And so most even non-religious parents would see like raising our kids Catholic and in Catholic schools was a way to kind of protect them from public schools and have a better education. And then in 7th grade, I finally realized that I was gay, but never like knew what to do with it because I didn't know. Nobody in my community were gay couples. I wasn't watching gay movies. It was just like, I know people are gay and I know my parents accept me, but like, what do I do as a 7th grader who's like trying to figure out all of the big mysteries of the world? It's a hard thing to like fit into the vision for your life.
Yeah.
And into middle school, I was having trouble making friends and wasn't sure of where I was, and then started attending my local Catholic church's youth group. And the parish that I went to was huge. I think it was like 8,000 parishioners. We'd have 2 to 3 priests. and there was both a full-time high school and middle school like youth minister. So it was incredibly well funded, which meant that me falling into youth group wasn't like I had to search it out. Like they have the apparatus and the resources and the education and more importantly the community of existing kids, that it was a giant social club. And so as I was getting into it, I wasn't out to anybody, but I was like, oh, this religion thing is like cool and it gives structure to my day-to-day life, and like I'm starting to make friends. And while I'm not making friends at school, then I go to youth group after school and like I have people that are part of the community, and then started reading the Catholic books, and my brain loves definitions and axioms and like the technical side. And so I was going right down kind of the new evangelization, like Catholic online apologetics, read your way into the faith type of thing. At the same time, I was like, what do I do about this being gay thing? And there's a bunch of apologetics on that. And I was like, I can experience these attractions and I don't have to act on them. And Catholicism presents this like perfect third option where you can be out to yourself and semi-accept yourself, but you never actually have to like confront coming out or like what to do about it. It's just like, I'll be celibate for the rest of my life. And as I got more and more into Catholicism and reading all of these books, I started hearing like the whispers of like a bygone era in the church, this time before something happened in the mid 20th century that like is different than how I've experienced church. And then eventually started hearing about like Latin and these older traditions. And for a long time, I thought that the Latin Mass was just the Mass that I went to on the weekends, but in Latin. And then I finally went to a Latin Mass, into an actual Latin Mass, and was like blown away because it was so different than anything ninth grade me had ever seen, both in my own experience of the faith and just the world at large. This big, beautiful, ornate church, there's routine, there's structure, and like fell hook, line, and sinker down the Latin Mass rabbit hole because you are uncovering these like rich treasures of this bygone era, and you feel almost like a liturgical Indiana Jones, where you're like you're experiencing these new traditions, and you're like, where did this Mass come from? And like this part of the Mass came from this. And it's an interesting thing that like both modern Catholics and Mormons are kind of in a race to like who can be the most Jewish in a certain sense. Like they love to appropriate the Old Testament, and like Jewish traditions used to do this, and like our liturgy is just a fulfillment of Old Temple worship. And so this like all of the new Catholic books are all about how like Catholicism is just the perfect continuation of first century Judaism. And like in as you get into like super rad trad land, like they go back to being anti-Semitic, but there's this weird strain of like new evangelization, both with Mormons that I've talked to and Catholics, where they're trying to infantilize and appropriate and claim rights to essentially like Jewish practice around liturgy, which makes it endlessly fascinating from a historical perspective. And then I went to the Latin Mass, was essentially exclusively attending that, wanted to become a traditional Carmelite monk, and so began the application process to join this cloistered monastery where it'd be you're praying for 6 to 8 hours a day and doing manual labor up in the Rockies. Beautiful Gothic ornate church that they were actually building from scratch. And I thought that was going to be like the rest of my life. I was discerning at all of these seminaries, and then the very last intake document out of dozens and dozens of pages was like, do you experience same-sex attraction? And at the time I was like, yes, like I don't act on it and I'm perfectly chaste, no pornography, no masturbation, no acting out with other guys. Like I am in line with church teaching. This is all the church has been asking of me. And up to that point, talking to this group, it was like, it would take sometimes like a week to get a reply. But then the next day they sent a short email like, you don't have a vocation here, you don't have a vocation anywhere because you experience same-sex attraction. Like your vocation might be to get married, but like you don't have a vocation anywhere.
Whoa.
And so that was like devastating because I'd figured out like what is it that a gay person is to do in the church? And I have a video out that just called like the Catholic Church doesn't know what to do with gay people, because there are so many competing schools of thought on like, so if we throw same-sex activity out of the window, like what do you do when you have those permanent same-sex attractions? Is it conversion therapy? Is it the priesthood? Is it getting married? Is it celibacy? But then it's like, but being a single person isn't a real vocation, so you have to be married or you have to be a priest. And then you talk to some vocation directors, and it's like, you can be a priest, but you got to go to like this type of therapy first. Some of them are more accepting. Some of them are like, well, it's a sign of being immature. Like whatever, there's the reasoning there. And then with marriage, it's like, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And like I finally had things figured out and was just like, nah, man, you don't have a vocation anywhere. And that like took me a while to recover, but I stayed Catholic.
Wow.
Went out to university to then was wanting to pursue my degrees in philosophy and theology. Ended up dropping out after a year to run my video production company. Left California fully thinking that I was going to be Catholic for the rest of my life. And then as I started thinking, like, I'm 20, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? If the priesthood's off the table, I'm going to be single for the rest of my life. And, like, for the first time as an adult, I was like, wait, that's like a huge thing to commit to. Like, as a teenager, when not everybody's getting married, it's like to be single in high school is kind of the norm. To then be single at 20 and realizing that, like, love to somebody to whom I was attracted is completely off of the table was like, oh, maybe I should, like, re-examine my beliefs and look at the evidence that I'm giving and have that match, like, what they're demanding of me. And so I read back through all of my apologetics. At that time, I had 2 bookcases full of books. I debated all of these issues all the time. And I started looking through these apologetic arguments not as, like, do they have an answer? But, like, do they have a good answer that is proportioned to what they're demanding of somebody?
Right.
And I was like, wait, they don't at all. And so that's a weird thing to be doing. And so as I looked through all of these different statements, all of these different doctrinal beliefs, I was like, wait, if this is like you go to a courtroom and the lawyers are always going to have an answer. The lawyers in any court case are always going to have a way of thinking at this, some sort of excuse, some sort of plausible, but not, or some sort of, like, you could make this argument, but it doesn't really move the needle.
Yeah.
And so as I looked back through arguments, I was like, wait, I don't have good reason for that. And specifically in the Catholic Church, it's like, because the church is seen as infallible, as like you have to believe everything. It also means as soon as it's wrong on one thing, like, that whole apparatus is shot. It's not that all of those teachings become false, but that it's like a house of cards when you go, wait, the church is wrong on this thing that they say they can't be wrong on. It's like, oh, so, like, we're done here. In traditional Catholicism, there isn't room for that nuance. There isn't room for, like, deconstruction or whatever it is. And so it was like, well, I guess I got to leave, and took kind of a year off from really looking at religion, from thinking about religion. And then circa year and a half ago, I was like, wait, a bunch of people have asked questions. I should start making YouTube videos. And so now that I've had, like, space away from Catholicism, now I can read these books and engage in these arguments, and they don't get me worked up at all. They don't get me emotional. It's just like I've had that space to heal, and so now I've been jumping back into the game and using years of apologetics and research. But otherwise, it's like then I just got to throw it out of my brain, and it's like a weird party trick to, like, know this much theology. So it's fun to, like, get to utilize those years of study and debate on the other side, which I think has made me a particularly potent weapon against myopic apologetics.
That's super valid. No, and the bit about, still having some value in your theology degrees. I've got 2 of them, man, and I use them every time I make a video. So, like, I'm glad I'm getting some return on that education. Damn, I'm so fascinated by the church's response to homosexuality in general, but specifically the question of same-sex attraction. So this is something that, like, I'm fascinated by, and I've always had a very, like, keen compassion for, even when I was, like, a young evangelical conservative. If you got me drunk, I didn't drink at the time, but if you had gotten me drunk, I probably would have said something like, yeah, I wish that those verses in the Bible that condemn homosexuality, I wish that they weren't there. I wish that, like, my gay friends, my lesbian friends could just get a pass. And it's so sad to me because I feel like homosexuality within theology is sort of a very particular final frontier, because it's one of the few sins that you could argue is truly victimless. Like with, I was steeped in purity culture just like you, so went a decade without, or not a decade, 7 years without doing the deed and looking at porn and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But at least for me, there was an out. and that out was, the eventual hope of marriage. And I can steelman that position. Like, it makes sense to me. You abstain from lust, you abstain from pornography, which conservatives would argue is like cocaine for your brain. And it's like, yeah, it makes sense on paper that this is there is a reason why God instantiated this. There's a reason why he forbade theft and murder and arson and, all of the normal list of sins. It makes sense, kind of bypassing the regulatory and ritual laws of the Old Testament for a minute. But like in the New Testament, it seems like that's the one sin where it's like, why? Why is it wrong for my two gal pals to want to spend the rest of their life with each other? Like there is, outside of eros, right? I mean, there's philos, there's agape, or not agape, but yeah, there's philos between, my lesbian friends, and so, like, I've always felt like this deep-seated compassion for specifically my gay and lesbian friends, because it's like they didn't ask for that temptation. It's just as innate to them as my temptation for women. But at least I'm going to get married someday, and then I'm going to get to bone and have hot, crazy, missionary sex with my wife, and then I'll have a release. But like, I'm asking them to just be celibate. That's like insurmountable to me. And so, like, I'm trying to steelman their position, and it's like, just take for granted for a minute. Let's imagine that the Bible is truly inerrant, that God truly has, for some omniscient, mysterious, ineffable reason, decided, hey, this one thing, no go. It's not hurting anybody, but just trust me, trust the Lord's time. All will be revealed in the great hereafter, and you'll understand that being a lesbian is actually the worst thing for. It's like bad for the environment or something. It it shortens your lifespan in half. For 10 generations. Who knows? But imagining that, like, okay, well, yeah, okay, the act itself is wrong. What do you do with the temptation? And the fact that they wrote you a letter telling you that you can't be a part of the monastic order because you're tempted? Like, do you know how many temptations I have in a day, period?
Well, that's the strange thing about kind of this apologetic strain, because they often, when they're confronted with, like, oh, people are born this way, the retort is then to, like, compare that towards temptations towards anger, right? Like, some people
Right.
are born more angry, or I'm attracted to people that aren't my wife, or I want to eat junk food all the time. Like, there's all these discussions to, like, trivialize the matter as, like, one of just like a set of normal temptations. And I think if homosexuality was this, like, this choice, or this, like, non-essential part of somebody's life that they didn't even have to confront, the apologetic would make slightly more sense. Right? Like, how do Catholics view junk food? Right? It's something that,
Right.
like, people debate, but there's kind of this, it doesn't have to be addressed, because junk food hasn't always existed. Not everybody consumes junk food. Somebody can and can't. And so they can kind of have this discussion, like, divorced from very strict rules, in this, like, ethereal type of, we can talk about it, at least we can talk about it. Versus, I tend to, like, I like to start conversations with conservatives to first realize that, like, people born this way doesn't automatically mean that it's okay, but it automatically means that you have to have a solution, or you have to have a proposition, or you have to have some sort of framework and in life path, because it's as the Catholic Catechism says, there is a non-negligible number of folks who experience permanent same-sex attraction, where like we have to acknowledge that this isn't like a junk food conversation, or like what to do about anger therapy. Like, this is an essential lens through which somebody has to view the world. And so your apologetics have to be a little bit more thought out than kind of like theological musings. Like, this is somebody's entire life that they'll experience for the rest of their life. And so your answers can't be like these half-baked, like, oh, maybe it could be somewhere between here and here. It's like, no, like we need answers, like, right now, because there are people considering this.
Yeah.
And that like force in making people come to a conclusion is often a perspective that nobody's thought about, that like being gay or whatever it is isn't just like a random part of somebody's identity. And they often make this apologetic of like your experience isn't your identity, and that your identity isn't primarily as somebody who's gay. It's somebody who is a beloved son of the Father but experiences same-sex attraction. And like I agree with the dynamic in which queer people's identities aren't their entire life,
Right.
but it is an essential piece, and it is a lens through which they will always have to view the world on either side A or side B of these conversations. Like if you trivialize it, it doesn't make it go away.
Yeah.
And so in a weird way, by like confronting it and accepting it, it does become trivial in like the grand scheme of people's lives. But it is the inability to admit that it is somebody's entire life, or something that they have to view their entire life through, that incongruity between the lived reality and the theological musings creates this dynamic that like often leads to people self-imploding.
That's fair. The other thing that I thought of while you're talking is, I mean, with all of those other, sins, there's kind of a gradient to all of them, right? It's like, well, what is gluttony? Okay, well, is it 1 hamburger? Is it 12 hamburgers? Is it 42 hamburgers? Like, and so there's kind of just a general sentiment of like, I should kind of like tone it down a bit. But that largely doesn't exist with the homosexuality. It's so binary. It's like you either kissed him or you didn't. Or I mean, maybe it shouldn't be that way, right? Because then if you're, if you are, I assume, I don't want to presume, that, if you're in that place of trying to find the line of like, hey, what does it mean to be kosher as a person who's trying to live celibate? And then what is, tiptoeing into dangerous waters. But the thing that just infuriates me is normal Christians, or I should say straight Christians, sorry, not to conflate the two, straight Christians' inability to empathize with their gay and lesbian brothers and sisters in Christ. Like, I have a gay Christian friend who, he is, he's trying to live a celibate lifestyle. And rather than trying to argue him out of that, I'm trying to better understand where he's coming from and better understand his frame of reference, because I don't know what it's like to be in his situation. But he was telling me this story about he ran up to some straight conservative Christians that he knew, and he was talking, and like, maybe, I don't know what it was that they said to him, or that he said to them, but maybe he said like, oh yeah, like I'm gay, but I'm living a celibate life. And they started like lecturing him, like, oh no, you're not gay, you're experiencing same-sex attraction, and you better make sure that you're not watching RuPaul's Drag Race, and you're not painting your nails, are you? And they were just ganging up on him. But it's like, he's doing the thing. For God's sake, he is sworn off of ever having sexual gratification for his entire life. Leave him alone. Like, the insanity of that it's like, well, no, these people will never be good enough for you just because they're tempted in a certain way. That is so disgraceful to me. And I don't know. What was it like, for you when you were trying to live celibate, trying to find that line?
It's a constantly moving goalpost as you go to more and more extreme versions of traditional Catholicism, where a lot of the mainstream evangelist type of Catholics on the internet, when they talk about homosexuality, they're quick to acknowledge the hurt, the pain, the like difficulty of this teaching, and they posit this view where you can experience same-sex attraction. And these speakers all have the same canned line of like, I look forward to the day when the church canonizes some beloved son of the Father who experiences same-sex attraction as a saint. That like the message at the beginning when you're watching these big talks is like, if you give up the actions, you will be a full participating, amazing member of this community. But it's because that content is made, it's very PR trained, right? Like it's the company that like has the flashy headline, the guarantee, the customer reviews. And then as you're signing up, there's like the hidden terms and conditions that nobody reads. And then as you get past that initial, like, people are giddy to have you there, and they're going out of their way to help you join their religion because they get a kick and feel helpful that they're helping somebody else come into this group. And it's like a few months after you like join and you become one of the members and not one of the just new members, that they stop like going out of their way to think about what they're saying. That they stop figuring out, well, is this Catholic speaker that we're bringing in, like, is he also PR trained? And as you like get deeper and deeper in, and more conservative, it goes from like, you can experience same-sex attraction and be an amazing saint, to these steps of like, well, like maybe people don't want to admit that like homosexuality is, it's not necessarily a moral failing, but it's kind of like a psychological failing. Like if you were truly healed, if you were a well-formed human being, then you wouldn't have these anymore. And a lot of Vatican documents around discernment to become a priest in relation to same-sex attraction talk about affective maturity. And though it's not sinful, being attracted to men is a sign that you don't relate to men properly, and that you have to have essentially like 3 years of not experiencing same-sex attraction in order to become a priest. And this language around like transitory versus permanent same-sex attraction as this sort of like, it goes from like, you can be attracted to men and be a full participating member, to then like, well, it's not sinful. And like, we're not saying that you have to do anything, but like, it's a sign of you being broken and of the fall. And then that like eventually moves as you get more conservative to rad trad land, where you have kind of this new wave of conversion therapists where it's not this caricature of like them shocking people with car batteries, but what they go for is like this fishing expedition for childhood trauma, where like every person at some point has a memory of not feeling man enough or not feeling woman enough. Like you will find a bad memory for everybody at some point.
Yeah.
But then they think what happens in the psychology is that through childhood trauma or assault, whatever it is that a young man is essentially distanced from their own masculine nature because of trauma or assault. And then they turn the exotic into the erotic. And so if you can just line up somebody's sense of masculinity and their true psyche, they line up and then they're perfectly straight. So it becomes this like endless and incredibly expensive fishing expedition doing like trauma therapy, but for like some kids at recess that are like, you're not a man enough. And then they're like, this is the solution. If we can overcome this childhood trauma, like you'll finally be straight. And then you start eventually like backing into this, like at the start of the journey, Catholics are like, you can be a single Catholic and be a full participating member.
Right.
And then eventually as you get more trad, it's like they have this hierarchy to vocations where the monastic life is the highest vocation because it most closely resembles what heaven will look like.
Yeah.
And then a step below that is the priesthood, because you're celibate, which is what heaven's going to be like, but you're doing a lot of work. And in heaven's just going to be prayer. So like the priesthood is less high than monastic life. And then even married people are like a very like St. Paul approach where like marriage is good, but like it doesn't resemble heaven. And it's kind of just like you're in the waiting room until heaven and kind of suffering along and helping your kids get there. And then single life is this third rail where it's not a real vocation. Where being single at any one given point is not in of itself sinful, but the point of vocations are to have responsibility, to be called outside of ourselves, to self-sacrifice, and you can't do that as a single person because you don't have this like mandatory responsibility. And so eventually it's like, wait, like same-sex attraction, I'm broken because of it, and it's not sinful, but like if I healed myself, I wouldn't experience that. And then I also can't just be single for the rest of my life because that's like the lowest case system in like the Catholic hierarchy. And so like then you're trying to like escape that, but then it's like marriage. And so it just becomes this like you hit the start and then like 2 years in it's like, oh shit, like the more trad I get, the more those goalposts have shifted to what it means to be a full participating member. And the people that aren't PR trained, like it's then they'll say the bad things in front of people's backs. And I was never out to anybody. I was straight passing enough that I was never out. And so I'd be listening to these conversations where people are getting coffee, like saying these just ridiculous things. And it's like, interesting. Like this is different than the PR trained multi-million dollar media empire type of responses. This is the lived reality of what the average Catholic thinks versus the PR shiny happy people like content on the internet.
Yeah. Can I be so for real? That is one of the worries that I have with my channel and with what I do, is that I'm concerned that I only go, a mile wide but an inch deep, that I only get the initial glaze from the nice people that I meet, and I don't really ever get the, down to the bare bones of what it really means to be a rad trad or an ortho bro or, a super devout Mormon. I want to, I want to find the next iteration of the church auditing. How do I go and live with a family for a month to truly embody what it means to be a Muslim or any one of these groups. But as it stands, I'm eager to work past and move past the initial glazing that you get from the PR managers. That's real.
Even what I see my own work doing, and there's kind of a network of us from a Catholic background, some still and some out, that make content. And what we often talk about in our groups is that we're just reading the terms and conditions of Catholicism. We're just kind of the Consumer Protection Bureau. That I don't have a vested interest in if somebody's Catholic or not Catholic. Mm-hmm. And when somebody comes to me and they're like, I'm gay and I'm Catholic, I'm never drop the Catholic part, leave.
Yeah.
And when somebody's coming into the faith, it's not you shouldn't join. I think all of it is that people should have the information to make informed decisions.
Yeah.
And I think what you're doing is that you're spreading that initial impetus that often makes people religious, which is I find benefit in this thing and therefore it's true or corresponds to some reality.
Right.
And then they hit your channel and they go wait, this community and the liturgy and this newfangled thing, it's found in a lot of places and it's actually not exclusive to one group. And when I was becoming Catholic, I wish I had seen everything that I love about this thing is not exclusive to this group that I'm in, which then means I get to negotiate. And so I think what you're doing at the top level is this inoculation against shiny, happy people, inviting you into a really cool group, because there's a lot of other really cool groups out there with other things, right? I often think that even I work in the business world and know a lot of sales tactics. And when I'm on calls with people that do high pressure sales, it's not that I never buy. It's just that I know their techniques. And if it's a good fit, then I go ahead and buy the thing. But when they try to exert time pressure or they're trying to reframe these arguments, I know the sales tactics, and so I can make an informed decision if I want to buy or not. And I think with new religion on the internet, I don't see myself as telling people to not be religious. Yeah. And I have very close people to me that have become more religious, and I've done nothing but support them, and I've had people become less religious, and I've done nothing but support them. And both when somebody's leaving religion, I also think there needs to be that same, there are challenges with leaving religion. It's not you turn off religion and your life is perfect and you have everything figured out. There's the same trial period as you're leaving that you should be aware of. And I think also when you're joining religion, there are things to be aware of. And I think that if there's content on the internet just giving people perspective and a different perspective and information to make informed decisions, people are ultimately going to make decisions that work for them when they have the full picture versus trying to propose or defend a particular vision for people's lives.
That's really well said. Yeah, and thank you for saying that and pointing that out.
Yeah.
That gives me slightly less imposter syndrome. Yeah, I mean, that was actually going to be one of the things that I asked you about, is, what is your, your response to, or, how do you navigate a discussion if somebody tells you, hey, I'm gay, I'm Catholic, and I want to join the priesthood. Or they say, hey, I'm gay and I'm Catholic, and I've decided to live a celibate lifestyle. Or if they say, hey, I'm gay and Catholic and I'm committed to living in a lavender marriage. I've got one friend who is in that situation, and trying to pick his brain a little bit and see how he's viewing things. Sorry, just to clarify,
yeah.
he is in a lavender marriage, not he's about to enter into a lavender marriage. That would be a little bit of a different discussion. I'd probably tell him to pump the brakes on that one.
I think the skill that I had to learn after leaving religion was to like inhabit my body. And what I mean by that is like when people are becoming religious, what they're often taught is that like religion and moral decisions that your emotions do not matter and your experience of the world does not matter, and that you have to read the theology books, and that your decisions are made like outside of your brain, where you're just kind of like trying to read the stars, and you're trying to escape your natural emotions around these things. And I think what I had to learn to do is to like, not that what I feel about a thing like determines if it's ethical or not, but that like I can first explore what I'm feeling, and that like I'm allowed to have feelings that contradict what I'm told is right and wrong. And that like on both sides, and I think sometimes atheists as they're leaving have to maintain this like, I can't ever miss the religion that I was a part of. Or like I can't ever say like, today, like, what if I was religious again? Or like, my friend who's religious, he's super happy, and I wish I was going to church today. Like, on both sides of the issue, I think the first step when somebody comes to me with a big emotion or with a big theological question is to kind of do the therapist thing, which is like, what do you feel about this? Right? They're going to have thoughts. They're going to have, this influencer said this, and this book said that, and like, there's these concepts that we're wrestling. It's like, no. Like I want you for a second to be okay with having the wrong feelings, or feelings that if you were holy you wouldn't have. Like I want you to feel through this thing first. And it doesn't mean that whatever you feel is the correct solution. But like you have to stop running away from the emotions. And like you have to internalize and live in your body. And that's the one thing that like helped, that I found therapy when I was leaving religion. The thing that I found most helpful about therapy was to like make life decisions where the therapist wasn't like, oh, what does Thomas Aquinas have to say about this? Or like, what does this atheist YouTuber have to say about this? But like, tell me about that. Like the therapist isn't there to come to these ontological like discernment of these meta-ethical concerns. They're just there to like help you inhabit a body. And so many better decisions are made when you can both acknowledge your feelings and your thoughts on the issue. And I have friends that are joining the priesthood, people that are leaving the priesthood, people that are going to be celibate for the rest of their life, people that are starting to embrace their sexuality. And like on both sides of it, it's just like I have to get them off of the theological mind and like into their body for a second.
Yeah.
Because if you let them talk theology, like it will go on for forever. Versus like if you can quickly knock somebody off balance and like have to be honest with themselves. It's crazy what happens when somebody like gets knocked off of the theological like internet debate thing and just starts feeling things. Is a very different side to people's experience and moral decision makings when they have the space and somebody to help them think about that versus like, this book said that about this random thing. Like,
yeah. Can I tell you one of the biggest grievances that I have with like the online religion space? There's too much bullshitting. Like, you know, especially in the like apologetics and anti-apologetic sphere. One of my axioms lately has been you have to do emotional work before you can do philosophical work, because otherwise you'll just lie to yourself. So like, you know, pause for a second. What do you want? What are you actually afraid of? What do you really fall asleep dreaming of? What do you want? And I think Christians are too scared sometimes to just drop the shtick. Like, lay your cards on the table, be like, I can't imagine life without Christ. Just say that. That's more compelling than you trying to bullshit your way through an apologetic argument. Just say like, I can't imagine not seeing my grandma again when I die. Kudos to you. I remember, you know, when I was kind of on the last legs of my faith, I was in the Netherlands. And there was this Australian girl, a backpacker, that I was like really trying to, you know, give the spiel to. We were on a boat like a barge that was also a Chinese restaurant. It's one of my most like vivid, weird memories. But I was talking to this girl and I was trying to like give her the pitch, and she was, giving me her pitch, trying to convince me that evolution was true. And I had this like weird moment talking to her where I was like, yeah, if I'm going to be like honest with this girl, and I think that honesty is going to be more likely to make her accept the gospel, then I should be honest with her. And so I was like, yeah, putting my cards on the table. I do really want this to be true. I believe that it is true. I have all of these apologetic arguments that confirm my bias, but there is a bias there. And I really need this to be real. I need Jesus to be real. And I think she respected me for that. I didn't get her. I didn't make her, she wasn't baptized that night, but I planted a seed, damn it.
I love, I was in LA with friends, staying at a friend's house, and one of his other friends was there. And he's a very devout Christian. And it was interesting to like have this dinner conversation where I wasn't debating him. Like I wasn't trying to back him into a corner. I was just asking these probing questions. I almost was like render the map of somebody's faith. But I find it a fascinating thing to just ask those open-ended questions where I'm legitimately not trying to like trap you in anything. I'm just interested to like, how do people answer these really big questions? Like with very vague questions, what are the words that they assemble, especially at the beginning? Kind of like reveals where somebody's heart is at.
Yeah.
And at the end of asking questions, and we were probably talking for 45 minutes, he was like, did I do okay? And I was like, you're not, I'm not debating you. He was like, what did you think? And then I told him, I was like, I think your faith is lived in. Like he didn't give me the apologetic bullshit.
Yeah.
He didn't give me the like 5 ways. He didn't give me the like, this denomination is correct. He was just telling me the story of how Jesus transformed his life. And I was on this move to a different part of the country. And the only way that all could have came together is with the help of a divine agent. And that when he thinks about sin and all these big theological concepts, which he's conservative about, like he stepped away from what he was supposed to argue to like feel his way through. And I was impressed by the end because when he was asking me, he's like, did I make good arguments? And I was like, it's not what I was going for. Like there was no wrong answers here. Mm-hmm. But what strikes me as different about your faith compared to the apologists that I debate on the internet is like, you told me a story about your life. You didn't tell me talking points. You didn't regurgitate something. You just told me about your life and like your faith is lived in.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating thing to watch young, zealous people who find benefit in a religion immediately flip to only talking about like the head knowledge and like this argument and the 5 ways. And I've talked to people and they're trying to make the 5 proofs of the existence of God, except they keep muddying the waters between like 1 and 4, and then they kind of combine 3 and 5 as like premise 2. And I'm like, this isn't why you joined. Like you can't get the argument right.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's okay. like you don't have to give me like the perfect thing because you're doing it really bad. And like, that's okay, man. And I often find that like when I talk to people in real life, one thing that when I like to talk about religion to people offline is that I really think that religion isn't a matter of truth claims on either side of the aisle. Like, does God exist or does God not exist? I don't find that to be a fun conversation to have with the average person. But like God as a phenomena, as culture, as psyche, as history, as literature is a brilliant thing to just like approach this concept of God, not as a truth claim. Where like does God exist or not is a question that's been hashed out for centuries. What I find fascinating is to talk to people and the definitions of God that people give me when they've never read apologetics are so different. Like I love talking to people that are deeply religious, but haven't heard like the right things that they're supposed to say. And I love those conversations because they're getting to think and feel. In my head, I'm like, you'd be called a heretic at your church for saying this, or like you'd be condemned for this. But like because you're living through your faith, and I'm looking at God not as an entity to prove or disprove or to investigate, but like God is a phenomena in society. Is a fascinating thing to consider and to approach without judgment on either side of it, and not get into the theology and just to get into the lives that people live, not as a matter of truth, but as a matter of of investigation and discernment and negotiation in a dynamic enterprise.
Yeah. Can I cut it both ways?
Yeah.
So I was talking about, Christians not being willing to put their cards on the table and not being able to, just admit what they want emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. I'll say that I see atheists and specifically, ex-Christians doing the same thing, where you kind of alluded to it before. It's like we're not allowed to say that, yeah, sometimes I miss my religion. And I think that for a lot of people, it's because we've seen some apologists or some evangelists be so uncharitable with it, or people, just jump on it like it's an opportunity to make a sale, that it's like we don't want to give those people an inch, and it's like prevented us from being vulnerable, and man, I've cried in the past year, thinking about the times that I've missed Jesus, and there's a real thing where it's like I don't want to let the Baptists know that, because then they're gonna be like, we almost got you, and no, you don't. I don't think that it's true, but man, the most real conversations that I have are, when I'm able to just drop the front. You tell me what you want, I tell you what I want, what I wish were, and yeah, it's real.
And I think there's a difference. There's two people that watch religion content on the internet. There's the debate bro content apologetic sphere. Mm-hmm. But that's what you see. That's what the headlines are. That's what the comment sections say.
Yeah.
And then I found that there's a lot of people that never comment and they never subscribe, and they're not involved in the discourse, but they're at home having these crises of identity and faith, and to admit emotions in the conversation, to admit personal experience into the conversation, mm-hmm. is convincing, and way more so. But they're never going to leave a comment. They're never the people that are going to make a reaction video. And so I think, especially in internet discourse around religion, there's two very different groups. There's the people in the sphere, and then there's the people who the sphere impacts. And those are two different, wildly different groups.
That's why I go to church.
Yeah, because it's amazing.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the thing that I'm chasing after, is the, not the PhD aficionado who's really good at debating. I still want to read their stuff. I'm intrigued by it. I want to talk to them as well. But one of my new friends is an Orthodox nun from Romania, and we just text. I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could just text nuns. But she's become a friend, and we're really transparent with each other, and that means the world to me. And I don't know, the fact that there's no posturing involved, I think it's powerful.
In many ways, conservative religion and ardent atheism is performative, mm-hmm. where what people have to say in support groups or during talks or in classrooms is what they're supposed to say, and even on online discourse and getting likes. And then you talk to these people when they know that their own group isn't watching.
Yeah,
it's just a drastically different side.
Yeah,
when you realize that even the most ardent radical traditionalists that I debate, and I was just one of the guys that I've debated on natural law. We were just talking today about what's the best barbecue in Kansas City. That when people don't have to perform in either direction.
Yeah,
it's just a very different side where all of a sudden there is nuance, and there is discussions to be had, and there is accompaniment, and then you realize that there's something toxic about the online religion space. on everything where you have to maintain a platform, you have to maintain your group. And that's where like my promise to myself and why I haven't gone full time with this yet is like I only talk to people on podcasts that I want to. Like I know people that podcast in the political space and they have to like get the roster and they all have to be kind of in the same niche. I'm like, no, I'm only gonna have podcasts with people I care about, and the conversations go as long as I care about them. And on the main channel, when I first started, like I got crazy views talking about like Catholicism and being gay, and then I realized that like that did well, and also I wanted to make other things, and those videos get way less views. But I'm like, I'm not talking to people on the internet. Like who I'm talking to is my past self. Like that's always my litmus test. Is like, is this something that my past self should have known or thought about or seen a perspective of? And that's the only metric of like what gets put onto the channel. And I even talked to many of these apologists, even people that I've debated that I've stayed in contact with. And it's just fascinating what's said when the recording's over and they talk about their families and they talk about their hopes and they talk about their insecurities. And even like the younger, like zealous Catholic converts that I talk to, like they, in a certain sense, when things aren't being recorded, they ask like these questions because they're new to this thing. And it's like, even though I'm out of this thing, I've lived through 5 years of following every movement online, and I've memorized like essentially everything there is to know about Catholicism. And it's interesting watching them like approach with like, I want to hear your perspective on this, of like, what should I be aware of? It's fascinating.
Yeah. I'm going to be dropping a video soon here in the next like week or two. Did you hear any rumblings about Ruslan's Bless God Summit?
I have seen the title of probably a tweet somewhere, but I know basically nothing about it.
I mean, it was a big evangelical conference, and he had like probably 24 big Christian YouTubers come, including like Voice of Reason and Sips with Sarah, some Catholic folk. But I had a blast, and I had a really good time. I talk about this in the video because I wasn't there in like the main auditoriums, like actually listening to the speakers, because I would probably have had a much less good time. But I was like hanging out with other YouTubers in the back room, and some of them had like seen my channel and kind of knew who I was. And maybe it was just the fact that like they didn't want to bum out the vibe by like getting really heavy with like philosophy, in the middle of the conference. But I had so much fun, and I respected like these YouTubers that I saw online. I probably wouldn't have a whole lot of respect for their faith on the online sphere. Like if I had just watched their content, I'd probably roll my eyes and be like, it's another one of those. But like IRL shooting the shit with them, it was really fun. And I say that, and I think in horror about the ways in which people must like hate watch my content, but they would also probably dislike me in person. So, tit for tat.
It's just fascinating to look at religion, and I even noticed myself, like I talk about religion very differently on the internet than I do in person. Most of the people that I know in real life, any major religious holiday, I have friends texting that don't know what I do on the internet, and they're wishing me happy, insert every religious holiday under the sun. So I tend to keep up with what religious holidays are happening just by virtue of who's texting. Because when I talk to people in real life that aren't trying to perform a religion, it's fun. It's culture, it's values, it's literature, it's life experience, it's what they're raised in, or it's what they found value in. And to just, like I said, I just don't think that religion is a truth claim fundamentally at the end of the day. And so to like release myself of like, is this person correct, or is this person whatever? It's like people, I was trying to explain to somebody who's trying to figure out, do they want to become Mormon or not? And they're like, it's a binary option. I was like, well, on paper, it's a binary option. But like, if you talk to anybody who has their temple recommend, the ways that they conceive about God and the reasons why they're there are so drastically different that it's in a certain sense not even the same thing. It's not even the same phenomena. Where they might be saying that the correct creed, or they might be having the temple recommend during their interviews, but like what religion is to them and who God is and what they think about the world are so radically different. And same thing on atheism, where like sometimes I catch myself where I'm talking about beliefs, and then I realize that like atheism, as I define it, and that people love titling debates like conservative Catholic versus gay atheist, like gets clicks, and then you realize that like I don't know, like I'm not. Atheism doesn't like inform how I live my life apart from a label for content. That like the ideas that I borrow and the life that I lived out is so much more different than this like I'm going to do science to figure out like what I value, and I'm going to do science to figure out like who is it that I love, and I'm going to do science of like how to treat like people around me. Like it's a meaningless term except for in contrast to a dogmatic view of the world. And then you realize like offline nobody believes in dogma in the way that they have to defend, and nobody disbelieves in God in the way that they have to defend. Yeah. Like once the cameras aren't rolling, everybody's just kind of like this soup of various ideas that are heterodox.
Yeah, that's real. Have you seen this episode of South Park where Cartman goes to the future and it's like a post-God civilization, and so everyone's like, "Oh, thank science."
Yes, I've not seen it, but I like that.
Heavenly science, we come to you right now, and we just ask you, dear science, like Lord Science, please show us if murder is wrong in science's name, amen.
It's like the memes of when atheists don't have peer-reviewed studies coming down the chimney to give them new sort of data. Those memes are when an atheist says "God damn it" instead of like scientific peer-reviewed data. Damn it! Like it's those types of memes. Like.
I will follow Christian meme pages for those, and I will unabashedly like those memes.
Yeah, I love them.
Oh God. So. You recently debated Jordan Peterson.
That is true.
I need to go back and rewatch just your portion. I'm probably halfway through the debate in total. You only went up that first time, right? Did you get back in the chair? Mm-hmm. Okay.
No, this episode had the fewest number of people speak compared to other surroundeds, where most surroundeds, the director likes to have recurring characters. Because people are voted off so quickly. Like if you watch the political ones, it's like snap, 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 snap.
Yeah.
And so you do see a lot of the same faces. Like when I debated Michael Knowles, I went up there 3 times. 2 of them made it to the final edit. Versus with Peterson, 12 of us made the final edit, and all of us were only up there once. And it was a much longer conversation and a much more in-depth conversation than any of those previous Jubilee episodes I think have ever had.
Wow. So is this your third time doing one of the Jubilee things?
Second time on Jubilee, yeah.
Gotcha. That's so cool, man. How was it actually meeting him? Because I watched your video on, Jordan Peterson made you an atheist. And I'm sure that there's, caveat there. Clickbait, right?
Oh yeah,
but there's a kernel of truth there, and I'm curious about that whole thing because Jordan Peterson was influential in my life. Ironically, I discovered Jordan Peterson as I became a nihilist, so that was fun, something. But I mean, was it weird meeting him, having read all of his books?
Doing Jubilee debates is like an extreme sport. Or like doing drugs. Like it is an experience where you apply and all you know is the title, 1 conservative versus 25 LGBT activists.
Oh, you didn't even know who it was.
No, or 1 Michael Knowles. So the ideal of how Surrounded plays out is that you don't know who you're talking to until they literally walk through the front door and sit down. So with Michael Knowles, I had assumed it was somebody else. Michael Knowles was one of like the 5 people that I thought might be on the episode.
Yeah.
And we didn't know it was Michael Knowles until he literally walked in the room, and 10 seconds later we're rolling. And same thing with Peterson. We're able to read between the lines based off of like the audition questions. It's like there's only one person that talks about Christianity in this way. So that one, most of us had guessed who it was and had done prep for it, which made this episode unique. But still, before we started rolling, we were all debating like who it was going to be. And so you apply, and then you kind of get booked a month or 2 beforehand. And then it just kind of like sits at something at the back of your psyche where you're like, I know in 2 months there's going to be 5 to 10 million people watching something that I do. And then like the month of the debate, it's like you start racking through like who could it be and what are the arguments, and you're drawing out the flow charts. And it's not this de-stress where it's like everything's going to end, but it's this eustress where it like hyper focuses your mind. And that week leading up, it is just like the only thing that happens in your brain. Yeah. Because your brain sees this threat of like the equivalent of multiple NFL stadiums full of people are going to see you do well or fail or be unremarkable. And the hard thing about Jubilee is that to do really well, like doing really well is like 2 on an impact scale, but doing really bad is like a negative 100 on the scale. Yeah. Like there is a ceiling to how good you can do, and there is absolutely no fucking bottom to how bad you can do. And so you see it on people where sometimes the clips to come out of it are almost always negative, and sometimes it's on the left or sometimes it's on the right. But like what comes out of there is very rarely like this person did so well that like somebody's career was ended. But that whole week leading up is like you're only thinking about this thing, and then you wake up the day of and time just comes to a standstill where you're like both of the episodes I did are in the afternoon, so it's like wake up and just be unable to do anything like the whole day because you're just thinking about it. And I'm not an anxious person. Like it wasn't like this, I'm going to die. It was just like I am locked onto one thing that's going to happen today, and the reptile brain is there. And then you show up and there's this like a lull like an hour beforehand where like you show up and you see the other cast and you're allowed to talk to other cast members beforehand. You're kind of like comparing notes. You're in the green room and you're trying to like give disclaimers to everybody or figure out who's going to talk about what. There's so many people that have any sort of cohesive strategy. Yeah. And then you just sit down and then you wait for the person to walk in, and then your brain just locks in where it is firing on all cylinders. But your brain's also in fight or flight mode, and so it's like firing on all cylinders, but at like 20% capacity. And so nothing else during those 3 hours happens in your brain. Yeah. There is no thoughts about what's next. There's no thoughts about what was before. And even both of the times that I've talked to them, you don't even know what you're saying. Like your debate is entirely off of instinct. Yeah. When you're watching at home, like you can think about words. In those conversations, it's just like deer in the headlights. Like you are trying to pick up on what is going to be the next talking point, and nothing. And then you go back after a few minutes, and then you try to like figure out what just happened and like piece what you said back together, because all of the flow charts that you've thought about, all of the talking points, that all goes out the window when you're under the spotlight like that. Yeah. So all these debates are purely off of instinct, where all of your cram studying is so unhelpful. And then it's kind of like wait, and the whole time you're like, I could be called back up at any point. And then you get done. And I remember after Peterson, it was just confusing. I was like, what the fuck just happened? Like, did we do well? Did he do bad? What was even said? Half the conversations you don't remember. I didn't remember half the things that I said. Right, and it's starting to like piece back together this extreme adrenaline rush as your body's like for the first time, like I can think about other things, and like real life comes back. And in the moment, I am more starstruck now watching myself talk to him than like in the moment, because in the moment your brain's not like this past memory and like I've read this thing. It's just like, this is the person that determines will I be liked or disliked by 10 million people on the internet. Like there is no fanboying. There's no like this is crazy. It's just like I am listening to every single thing that is being said with such hyper focus that it's not even Jordan Peterson or Michael Knowles that's talking. And that's a common experience where, like, you have to think about them, and what you often end up thinking about them, they are just a person. All of the fanfare, everything that you want to admit to evidence is now gone, and they are just sitting in front of you, and it does not matter who they are. And then afterwards, like, oh shit, like we talked to Jordan Peterson. I've read all of his books and followed him for years. And now I'm like, in a weird way, I'm like, did that happen? Like in my brain, like I know that it happened. But it's like, I met a guy to debate. I didn't meet Jordan Peterson. And now that I've like moved back, then it's like, I debated Jordan Peterson, not just a guy who was sitting in front of a chair. So it's like that weird flip where it switches the brain. And the whole episode, I think this will be a Hall of Fame Jubilee video because the format is made so that the hero wins. Like that's what they call in all of the casting documents is the person in the middle is called the hero because on the outside, you don't know the prompts. You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know who's on your team. You have no time to prep. You can't have notes with you. You can't Google search things. And so it's somebody who's media trained and was prepared for their own claims up against people most of the time that have never debated before, that they can't Google something in the middle like, hey, that study was bullshit. Like the format is designed for the hero to win. But I think what got inverted this episode is that for the first time, the hero was defeated in a certain sense. Like because of a culmination of Peterson picked a bad format. Like if he had talked about politics, he would have done way better. But he picked his weakest thing. Jubilee casted people that were already in the space. So the hero picked something dumb. The audience then, for the first time, was like all good at what they were talking about. And then the actual performance itself, it was very much like an Emperor Has No Clothes type of moment where nothing Jordan Peterson said in that debate was new to anybody that's followed him. Yeah. But for the first time, the like people that have only seen clips of him and thought he was a Christian in a 10-second soundbite have figured out what he's actually believed for a decade. Yeah. And it was kind of like, oh shit, the Emperor has never had any clothes. And Peterson normally can abstract his way out of basic questions. Right. Or when he's talking to atheists, they often put on the kid gloves because they have a vested interest in like staying in his good graces. And for the first time, like people were calling him out and getting him off of his like sophistry. And you see these like heated clips, which weren't personal. They weren't argumentations. It was just like for the first time, you got a clear answer from him. And then there's like the slower conversations where like somebody who knew what they were talking about was investigating Jordan Peterson in a shorter format. And what I love about the surrounded format is that you have this like smorgasbord of debate options. Yeah. Where like my friend Greg, who was the third person to talk, and I made the same exact argument, but I threw the big technical words in there, and he said the exact same thing, but in a way that most people can understand. And like Danny had a very aggressive like, are you a Christian or are you not? And Jordan Peterson rage quit. Versus Xena on the episode had this way that she got to the bottom of his thoughts and he admitted, you've pushed me beyond my understanding. And she took the nice open-ended approach and Danny took the answer my questions approach. And like all of these things combined into one 90-minute segment was like the perfect, people finally figured out what was happening this whole time because they had a number of different angles attacking a number of different arguments in a faster paced format. And so I think the right is starting to drop Jordan Peterson, because they're starting to figure out like what he's been saying this whole time. And it just took people to kind of like get that out of him in a non-technical way. And so I knew that we had done well, but I didn't realize like the right was going to drop him essentially over this. So this like constant fomentation of his like perennially imminent conversion is like a cottage industry of content where like Jordan Peterson's about to become a Christian has been like YouTube video titles for years on end. Right. And now for the first time, it's like, oh, maybe that's not going to happen. And like he moved into the center in which like the left didn't like him and the right dropped him and just kind of like left in this vacuum. And I think everything just culminated well. And I thought like with the Knowles episode, that was relevant on the internet for like 2 days and then disappeared. And this one now, weeks later in this cottage industry, I'm still seeing like my face plastered across YouTube in reaction videos. Yeah, some that have 10 views and some that have 250,000 views of. It's just like this weird thing that like it escaped and everything came together in this perfect culmination that I think really upset. It is going to follow his career for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I've been saying for the past 2 or 3 years, and I feel bad even like talking about him. Maybe I'm too nice that like even with a figure as big as him, it's like, oh, I hope this doesn't hurt his feelings. He's not gonna watch this. Yeah, I mean, the way that because he was never super conservative. He was always, at least modestly liberal and modestly left up until he got bought by the Daily Wire. And his musings on religion and stuff, his musings on like how to structure your life and not be a useless bum. Like, I liked that Jordan Peterson. He was my internet dad for a little while there. And when I had my dark night of the soul and was on the verge of blowing my brains out, like, some of his words were echoing in my ears, and it's like, maybe that's hell. And but I mean, I really like owe him something, because he did talk me down from making some really stupid decisions, and I still appreciate him for that. The way that it's just become yet another political pundit, just clamoring about the lowest common denominator, it just grieves me. And so, like, yeah, I mean, I feel like it would be good for him if, the Daily Wire dropped him and he had to, go to the desert for 3 years and kind of like rediscover himself. And it's a little late in life to be doing that, but, if he came to a place where he kind of like walked back a little bit, some of the things that he was saying, and, people could like rediscover some of the beauty and the modesty of some of his claims, I'd be here for that.
I always say, like, I agree with 96% of what Jordan Peterson says.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it makes these descriptive claims about religion and meaning and psychology and literature. And it's interesting going from reading Maps of Meaning to, like, each of his subsequent books. They're changing, where in Maps of Meaning, he has, like, this pie chart and seems to kind of equally split these lessons between Christianity and Eastern traditions and Islam and these literary like Disney stories. Right. And he seems to be pulling from a number of different sources and sees them as all participating in a particular thing. But then each of his books, the Christian slice of the pie gets bigger and the diverse other sections of the pie get smaller in every single book. And how he talks about religion, where I know a lot of very progressive pastors that I'm friends with, and they love how Jordan Peterson approaches religion because it's the way that I approach religion. Like when I'm talking to somebody in real life about God and meaning and purpose, I'm just pulling stuff from the Jordan Peterson playbook of like how we understand these things. And when he showed me that like everything supernatural about religion can be explained naturally, which means that it's up for negotiation. Yeah. That if we expand religion to precisely be the domain of purpose and morality, as he talks about in the Jubilee debate, awesome. It's that hidden 4% and the like occult. That's probably the wrong term to use in this term, but hidden, like so what, this implicit so what in his content. Yeah. Where if what he was pushing for was for a broader array of religion and spirituality, where he looked at the nuance of the world and his framework and his interpretive lens, and like he was talking to those types of people on his podcast. And like for people leaving religion, he provided this off-ramp because he provided an off-ramp for me when I finally understood what he was saying. But like what he pushes for on his platform, and the worst thing to ever happen to Peterson is Twitter. Like if he was given a typewriter, he would be my hero still. But it's because he's gotten into this culture war stuff between his own rise to fame in Canada with Bill C-16 and now being with the Daily Wire, talking about these issues. Like what he fundamentally, and what I use him for, is to like look at the world with this lens of perspective and like curiosity and tremendous meaning and like respect for people's beliefs. But it's when he starts lashing out at Elliot Page's doctor and calling Elliot Page's doctor who performed gender-affirming care like a Nazi doctor. Mm-hmm. And then like lashing out on climate change as like the worst thing ever. And then like saying that feminism is like a plague on society. It's like all of a sudden, like where did this nuance that you've been demanding for religion this whole time, that atheists look at religion as this nuanced and complicated field. Right. Like where is that, Jordan Peterson, when we talk about sex and gender in politics? Like where did the nuance that you're demanding go? And like you have he's like this Newtonian fluid where like he's fluid and dynamic, and then for like from time to time he turns into a rock solid, like we have to throw these doctors in jail. It's like, whoa. No, 96% of what you say is incredible and nuanced. And like I think religion as an enterprise needs to be afforded this nuance and these expansive views around what God is to people and what religion is and what meaning and purpose and all of these things. But like you can't do that.
Yeah.
And then reflexively grab Christianity as this bludgeoning tool and this bulwark against a political movement that you don't like, and to cozy up to Christianity insofar as you've constructed postmodernism to be this tearing down force on society. That I think Jordan Peterson is the real postmodernist when he talks about what is God. And in the Jubilee debate, he gives 5 different definitions, which I think are all valid when we talk about God. But it's that he only wants it to be the conservative Christian Daily Wire version of what God is, not the loving, liberal hippie Jesus or the nicer form of Buddhism or the New Age spirituality that's helped somebody after a lifetime of hurt in the church. It just doesn't seem congruous and seems not genuine. And I don't think he's woken up and made this plan. But over these careers and cozying up to different people and having $100 million platform to maintain seems to have tainted him. Like 1990s Jordan Peterson Maps of Meaning is my absolute hero.
Damn. That's really hard.
And if you just got dropped from the Daily Wire and just like had conversations, and what I loved about him in the Jubilee debate is like he wasn't there to win, which is also like why his team should not have invited him. My theory is that somebody on the Daily Wire team for him is getting fired over this because he didn't know what he was signing up for. It was very apparent that he had never watched Jubilee and he didn't know what he was walking into. And Jubilee was very clear about what was happening. Like it's not a failure of communication on Jubilee's end. It wasn't like they showed up and then they're like, okay, you're a Christian now. Like he admitted, he accepted the format, he made the prompts, and his team was very apparent. Like Surrounded is a series that is out there on the internet. And when Michael Knowles came to the table, like I could tell he had prepared for weeks beforehand. He knew his talking points. He knew how the format looked. Like he knew what he was there for. Peterson didn't know what he was there for. And it's not Jubilee's fault. And it's not us atheists' fault. Like, because we didn't know who we were talking to. Somebody on the Daily Wire team had a massive miscommunication because Peterson's not a debate guy. And so him not being a debate guy, and he talks about at the end like he wasn't there to win a conversation. It's like Surrounded's not the format to do that. Like at all. And so in many ways it's a tragedy. In some ways people have finally realized that the emperors had no clothes. In a certain way it's like, God, if we could just get back to the old Jordan Peterson, like that would be awesome. But is that old Jordan Peterson the same Jordan Peterson? He was just more careful about his beliefs. I don't know. It's weird to like be part of an internet shakeup because I think this will follow his career as right-wing shows talk to him and left-wing people talk about him.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thoughts and prayers for him, right?
What do you mean by prayer?
What do you even mean? What do you mean by mean? With that, I have to wonder how much cognitive dissonance there is there, because it seems like the kind of unchecked cognitive bias that can kind of slip its way into some of his ideas. And I wonder, if that's some of what happens, where it's like, okay, 1990s Peterson had this kind of deistic, almost emergent concept of God, right? And then, you're surrounded by, conservative Christians who kind of keep shoehorning what you're saying into their ideology. And I wonder if, there's some cognitive dissonance that's in there that hasn't really come to the fore yet. It really hasn't had to contend with itself. There's a little bit of equivocation happening. He's talking about God in the way that he always has, and then the conservative evangelicals in the room are saying yes, amen, and he's watching the way that their faith is playing out, and maybe there's a little bit of mimesis in there, and their ideas are subtly infiltrating his framework, but he doesn't really, hasn't really hashed out that like they're not entirely compatible. I wonder if it's just something as simple as that.
He's 65, and so and from the way he talks about things, he was kind of thrust into the spotlight with all of the Canadian stuff, and he's never. I mean, part of him getting onto benzodiazepines was over like the pure stress of going from a unknown Canadian professor who talked about these various schools of thought to like somebody getting millions and millions of views, and that like fried his brain, which I think anybody who isn't familiar with the internet and how it works, and he's in this, I think, just feedback loop where you see the very authentic Jordan Peterson come through when he talks about like the impact that he's made, and he talks about people come up to me, and he has this story that the anti-Semites on the internet always mean, but he talks about like he was in New York around Orthodox Jews, and they were all calling him rabbi because of how impactful they had been on his life. And he talks about how people stop him in the street and have like they'll be crying and telling him how much of an impact that they've had, which is tremendous. And I can't imagine what that's like for somebody who didn't grow up with the internet to then be thrust into the spotlight with media people everywhere, and to a certain extent the rabid left like trying to cancel him. On top of them, the right wings like telling them these incredible stories about how they changed his life. And then for the only people that he talks to or that want to come onto his podcast to also be generally right-leaning figures. Like, I can't imagine Jordan Peterson has like a neutral YouTube page that he's just like a Gen Z person who watches all this content on the internet. He's a guy in his 60s who has a team that does all of the work and the PR, and he sits down and has these deep conversations with right-leaning figures, and then sees this feedback of people saying that he changed his life. And so in a certain sense, like I can't blame him for not realizing his critiques, because he's not scrolling TikTok, like watching like some leftist video essay person talking about like his failures. Like he's 65, like he's not doing that.
I hope not. God.
Yeah, that would be crazy. But like this Jubilee episode, like he didn't know what Jubilee was. He didn't know what Surrounded was. Like his team was just like, show up here, and didn't know what he was getting himself into. And that's where like, if what he was saying, if he was aware of the people that he could talk to, I feel like the Jordan Peterson podcast would be talking to these liberal seminarian professors that are like, well, did Jesus like bodily rise from the dead? Like these conversations are something that you have at like woke Rainbow Church Seminary and like Deconstruction Atheism YouTube. And it talks about cognitive science is like what you have with these atheist thinkers that write books. Like what he talks about and what he thinks is perfectly congruous with a much more expansive view of what religion could ever be.
Yeah.
But it's only used in service of like the right.
It's a weird thing. It's a really weird thing. I'm glad that in your video on him, you mentioned that he kind of if he's a 5 and the radical left are a 1, and then you were a 10 as far as being a rad trad. He made you more progressive. He kind of brought you back to center in a sense. I'm glad that you mentioned that. One, because I hate the binary thinking that a lot of people will employ of like, oh well, he's anyone is this or that or all good or all bad, and I'm guilty of doing that myself. I say to my shame, but it's funny because looking back, when I left Christianity, conservative Christianity, before I left conservatism. So, but it was Joe Rogan that made me more progressive.
Same here.
It was really, because I remember, I remember Steven Crowder going on the Joe Rogan show, and I was a big Crowder fan at the time, and then seeing him like next to Joe Rogan and how like rabid this man was next to this like chill liberal smoking a joint, I was like, oh, maybe this guy is kind of weird. Talking about Steven Crowder, but yeah, it's fascinating how like one person's uh, stepping stone into the pipeline of conservatism or progressivism can be the opposite for somebody else.
That's right. I remember listening to Joe Rogan, and he was a liberalizing force because in a traditional Catholic sexual ethic, masturbation is just as sinful as murder. Like you have the same eternal consequence for murder as for masturbation.
What the
And
hell?
so you have venial sins, which are like sins that you can commit, but you can still go to heaven. So like you lied to your parents, or you said something mean about a classmate, or
Yeah.
you should have prayed, but you didn't pray. And then you have mortal sins, which are this concept of like, it's not just damaging to your life of grace, but like God's grace ceases to be alive in your soul. Like it's this like cutting off at the root. And so you have all of the words that'll get me banned from YouTube of murder and kidnapping and all of these things. And also not going to church on Sunday and masturbation, like these seemingly benign things. Like in Catholic theology, if you willingly miss Mass on a weekend when you could have gone and you don't go to confession for it and then you get hit by a meteor, like you're going to hell. It's like a crazy, or same thing with masturbation, like even entertaining an impure thought for 10 seconds is grounds in a traditional Catholic sexual ethic to go to hell for all of eternity unless you repent. And so for Joe Rogan to be talking about masturbation and to be talking about his one of his sponsors was like Fleshlight for a time. And it seemed like this. That like in the early days of the Joe Rogan podcast, that was one of his sponsors, which is just an incredible like turn of events. When I was going through like these internet archives and listening to Joe Rogan, I was like, wait, like he's stronger and more disciplined and more masculine than most of these like Twinkie rad trads on the internet who rant about like sexual immorality and that to jerk off once is going to like destroy your life and implode. And next thing you know, you're going to be a crack addict because you jerked off once. And then to see Joe Rogan talk about like, yeah, I jerk off from time to time. And like, I know like it'd be bad to do it like all the time, but also like to not ever do it is like an extreme. And like, I'm in a happy middle. I was like, wait, fuck, like there's like a happy medium where you can hold two things at contrast, which is like having an addiction to pornography is bad, and also spending your entire life like white knuckling your way through like never committing an impure thought, and then you spend like most of your days trying to like avoid temptation versus like, I don't know, man, a few times a week you just gotta like relieve the pressure, and then like you move on with your life and you have a perfectly happy life. I was like, what in the hell, like. And so Joe Rogan was also a moderating force. And I think that's where the caricature of what new atheism is or has failed is that like it was raised in contrast to like this late 20th century conservative creationist Americanist Protestant theology, in which the debates that new atheism is seen to have had in the collective psyche is like either it's creationism or it's we're just going to do science to figure out all of the world's problems and we're going to usher in this new era of amazingness.
Right.
And then I've talked to some of those new atheist types and their arguments just don't seem relevant anymore because it's not this crazy binary. It's a new type of binary. Yeah. But I think the solution to radicalism online on any form is just to broaden your horizons, where you see that like with religion, it's not perfect atheist life or terrible atheist life or amazing religion or committing hate crimes. Like each side has this caricature of the other side. Yeah. And then as I think people see with your content and what I hope to do is that like, yeah, like religion isn't a monolith and non-religion isn't a monolith. Yeah. In this weird like Jordan Peterson type of way, like it's all these degrees of various types of concepts. And I think that's the solution is for a rad trad to realize that like, oh, like you have something that works for you. And there are amazing things as part of your religion. Yeah. And also those same things that you love are over here. And part of my own deconstruction, like I started writing my arguments against Mormons and then they started running the exact same arguments where they would do the same like God, gospel, and the church arguments. And I was like, shit, we're using the same arguments and getting to different conclusions. And it like really threw me for a wrench. It wasn't the atheist arguments that like threw a wrench at me. It was just like these other people that argue for religion professionally do the same exact things and the same testimonies and the same arguments. And like they get to an idea that I think is heretical and not even Christian. and they're talking about it in like the same way that I do, like at least
Yeah.
gave me
Yeah.
pause. And I think like I don't think that my content's ever gonna take some crazy rad trad Catholic from like I hate gays to like I'm showing up to Pride. But when a gay person shows up to their parish, they're gonna go like, I kind of know what their experience is like. Or when their sibling comes up, they know to like, I might think that it's sinful, but like we're gonna like table that conversation for later.
Yeah.
And it's just by expanding horizons that people might technically have the same beliefs, but the way that they interact with the world and interface with other beliefs is radically different when they realize that there is complexity and there are other things out there and that their view of truth is not exclusive. In the same way that I have friends that have become religious because they were raised in atheist households and never knew what religion was until they found benefit in it. And I think and like I was saying earlier, like I think the thing that we have to do to combat rising right-wing conservative religion isn't to tell them they're wrong. It's just say like, there's those guys over there and there's those guys over there, and like you're not special. Like you have a group that you love.
Yeah.
But there's nothing unique or new or innovative about these things. People have been religious for forever and hashing out these same arguments. It's just showing people options so they can make informed decisions and they can have bridges in and out of things and they can make those decisions versus like, I'm going to prove you wrong. Terrible way to like start an argument. But I do think like some of the debates that I do have that edge to them, not because I'm going to convince the other person, but because it's just like hashing out of beliefs on both sides. So that's somebody from the audience can go like, wait, both of these sides like have some amount of truth in them. And maybe these like crazy religious arguments don't hold up to weight. But I'm never talking to religious people. I always think like I'm talking to people who are in between. Should I be gay? Should I be celibate? And like, oh, here's a conversation that gives a survey of arguments versus like, I'm going to convince some rad trads on the internet to like go to Pride next week. Like,
Yeah. Which, yeah, don't give them that idea because then they'll do what I did when I was at seminary and go and evangelize at Pride and at Mardi Gras, and that's not fun. Like it is a lonely time doing that, like evangelizing at Pride parades and stuff. Not the vibe.
one of the ex-Catholics that I do content with, it's a podcast called Leave, Laugh, Love. And the two hosts, Evelyn and Veronica, are two of my closest friends, and they talk about how they used to do a lot of anti-legal abortion work. And so they'd fly to different states and just knock doors for states that are having referendums. And you get doors slammed in your face, and you get told that you're a piece of crap for holding those views. And like their mind started changing when somebody's like, man, I'm not voting for this amendment. Like, this is dumb. But like, do you want some water? Like, it's really hot out.
Yeah, yeah.
And like that was enough to be like, wait, like these people that I talk about, these evil baby murderers who want to destroy all of civilization, were like, hey man, like I don't agree with you, but like I can tell it's hot out in the middle of Kansas. Like, can I get you some food or water? And that was enough to be like, oh. And I know people like Trent Horns talked about on his podcast. He's like, Catholics, sometimes they fall away because they do a reverse ad hominem where they go like, the other side's nice, so maybe they're right. And like we have to teach our kids that like maybe the other side can be happy, but they're not really happy. Because he's even noticed that like when radical people are just met with normal people that sidestep like the apologetic bullshit and just like break bread with them, it's like, oh, maybe I can break bread with other people too.
Yeah.
And when I was super conservative and religious, my family had the perfect response, which is just like not engage in it. Like they knew it was a phase and it was a teenage thing, and it's just like, yeah, man, like let's talk about we're going to grandma's this weekend. Like they just sidestepped it, and it was perfect because it also allowed me, as I was deconverting, to like, I didn't have to say, oh, I was wrong. And like we've never talked about it since. It was just like a bygone era. And so giving people an out, that's obviously different than like on the internet. Like sometimes you need to throw bricks, and when somebody's throwing bricks, you need to have like throw bricks back. And like sometimes you need to have that confrontation. But like in person, like if you talk to people on the internet, if you talk to people in real life like you talk to them on the internet, you're going to have a really bad day, and they're going to have a really bad day. And the only thing that's going to happen is you're both going to just like lock down. Like
Yep. Man, no, I remember the same thing happened to me as to those women. When I was backpacking Europe and, trying to share Jesus with people, I was getting really into the martyrs. At the time, I was writing a whole album dedicated to Saint Perpetua and Felicitas, and I was just so consumed with the idea of like, contra mundum, it's us versus the world. And as I kept writing that album, and as I started reading the testimonies of the martyrs, I started like second guessing, how unilateral some of these stories were. Like, yeah, was that saint entirely in the wrong, or entirely in the right? Was he kind of like, throwing stones and like making a scene unnecessarily? And was he, really being unreasonable with what was being asked of him? And then, so that was happening, in my personal life. And then finally I met it was the weirdest thing. I met this Australian guy in Greece, and we were talking about everything, and I was telling him a little bit of the album, and I knew he was secular. I knew he was worldly. And I told him the story of, Perpetua and Felicitas because it means so much to me. And I told him the story of these two great Catholic martyrs, and he was like, that is really beautiful. What are you going to do about it? And it was like, he was challenging me to be better, to live out my faith in this way. And it was like, it was bizarre to me. I was like, you can't do that. You're on their side. You're supposed to, tell me that they were both, dumb, brainwashed sluts or something. The fact that you're like, tipping your hat to them and then imploring me to live better because of their example, that was really jarring to me.
Yeah, I remember one of my teachers in high school. I was super conservative religious at the time, and like one of the first days of class, it's like you're writing a note card of your name and preferred pronouns, and I wrote like Your Highness as a way to like mock the whole pronoun thing. It was super Catholic, and like it was weird that like she was nothing but supportive. Like she wrote the letters of recommendation that I used to get into college for my theology degree.
Wow.
And she talked about how for class assignments I would talk about religion, and she would ask me questions because I'd always loved to talk in front of the class. And like she was nothing but supportive. And also Muslim classmates were dismissed to go pray at the times that they were supposed to pray. And people that were queer, she was advocating for them. And like it threw me for a loop that she could like write my letters of recommendation and talk about how religion has influenced my life and let me share what I was up to.
Wow.
And also like protect everybody else at the table. And it was something that I thought about as I was deconstructing. I was like, she wasn't even like playing some long game where she's like, I'm going to deconvert him. She was just like having basic respect and dignity, and was excited for people finding cool things. And I oftentimes think, especially in religious conversations, like if you can pull alongside somebody and like recognize when they talk about how Jesus transformed their life, and to like talk about how awesome that is, to be like, and to acknowledge the good that has happened. Because I think we are only hindered by making straw men, and that to pull alongside somebody and to let them talk and share their story, then they feel like when you're engaging with them that like you actually listened and you've considered the arguments. And I don't know if you felt this, but I feel like in a certain sense, the online Catholic religious right is both scared and respectful of me, because they realize like I know all of their tricks. Like when I talk to people who are getting into apologetics, and then halfway through, then I'm like, and here's a better way to make that argument. And they go, oh shit, this guy like knows all of the tricks that I've learned. And then in like the field of apologetics, which is like this game of like who can memorize the most layers of like argument, counter argument, rebuttal to the rebuttal, counter, like shifting, like if you know all of the like conversational points, and I like to just like skip to the bottom, like I know the game here, like let me hear like your actual thoughts. I'm like how once all of your memorized phrases and your conversational techniques and your gotcha questions, like I know all of those. And so we're going to skip over those, and I'm going to make you like have to think. And he was like apologetics isn't like this intellectually honest field in which like these academics are just doing research on the Bible. It's like they in order to keep their job, they have to come to the same conclusions. They can just add more nodes to the conversation tree. In a weird way, I've had a lot of people that I've reached out to that don't want to talk because they know that like they're going to be left with nothing. Because like I like to think through my positions, and as an atheist now, it's like I change my ideas all the time. Like I don't have to uphold the same thing to keep my platform.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when people have to engage on the level of like they have to think about it, it's like, oh, then things slow down, and like you see the gears turning when they have to like come up with their own ideas, and they tend to be a little bit more heterodox when all of the orthodox talking points have been taken up.
Yeah, yeah. It's a funny thing. Yeah, sometimes I worry that, maybe not that I worry, but, you know, I feel like, I think back to like the new atheists, and Richard Dawkins, he probably added 3 years to my Christianity. Like, you know, him and other less charitable atheists, because it reinforced the idea that like everyone on the outside is a bad guy. And so it probably prolonged or delayed my deconversion by years. Because I could just point to them and be like, see, that's what I'll become if I become an atheist. And I don't know if I like should say this, but one of my hopes for this channel is that I hope that I'm the impetus of a lot of conversions and deconversions. Like I hope that people watch my stuff and they're like, oh, maybe I do need to walk away from religion because the permutation of religion that I've been engaging with is really toxic and it's going to kill me. Then at the same time, I hope that people watch my stuff and they're like, actually, that one church that he mentioned, that sounds kind of nice. Yeah, I have been kind of depressed and nihilistic-y lately. Maybe I need to give this another shot. But I think that whole enterprise, you know, the reason why I'm an atheist is because I think that that whole thing is kind of damning for religion. You know?
Yeah, I think that's where all of these very dense conversations on the internet, like you have to touch grass at some point, where even this week with Peterson, between the main video and clips and reaction videos, my face in the past week has been seen 20 million odd times. And it's weird to go from like on the internet with my feed, all of these people that I've watched for years on end on both sides of the discussion are now like talking in obviously the videos aren't all about me, but they're reacting to my clips. And I'm like, oh, I've watched this guy for years and I've watched this guy for years. And like it feels like it's real. And then like I talk to anybody else in the real world and they barely know who Jordan Peterson is, let alone like the recent Jubilee video, whatever Jubilee is, and then like the arguments that were had, and then like the fallout from that. It's just weird. Like all of these conversations feel, our reptile brains are so engaged in this world that feels real.
Yeah.
Like it's the fucking internet. Like my parents don't know what I do. My brothers don't know what I do. Not because they would not like it, but it's just nice to have people that I know that they're not going to watch my content because it's so hyper siloed in a niche inside of a niche inside of a niche.
Right.
And to have friends, most people that I know don't know what I do on the internet. And I keep it that way because then it's like, then it feels real when people that I know are talking about something that literally only exists on the internet.
Yeah.
And that the thing that I've talked to debaters and have prepped people for is like, you're always talking to the audience. Like Christianity is not the top 5 apologists on the internet. Like it's the masses of people that are watching. And so you have to be careful to both confront the ideas of people that represent Christianity and then also realize that like, that's not Christianity.
Yeah.
Like there's the Vatican and then there's Catholicism, and those are not the same things.
Yeah.
Like what happens in a catechism in when you get to a certain hyper niche level of knowledge in which Catholics don't even understand the arguments that like I'm countering because they haven't even read deep enough. Like
Yeah.
it feels real, it feels visceral. And then you're like, who the fuck knows about hermeneutic indifferentism and phenomenological conservatism? Like people really just be living their lives at the end of the day. Like
We'd be out here.
yeah, just be out here living life. And I feel like the Jordan Petersons of the world, or the people that they get sucked into the internet in which their career is real, but it's also not real, and they just start talking to the people that they're talking to, and then they forget that like the viewers are their career, not the people that they engage with.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's something that I hope somebody's not going to pull this, and 5 years later I'm on the internet like pulling a Jordan Peterson, and somebody's going to pull this clip and be like, remember when? Yeah, it's just like you got to keep touching grass and realizing that all of these people are the internet doesn't exist. 20 million people isn't real. Like you have 10 people that you hang out with every week in real life, and you have maybe 50 people that actually know your name that you text.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that's real. Like 20 million people isn't real.
It's no, that's valuable. Regarding that phenomenon, though, the constant fear of like having something that you said on the internet be clipped and like thrown together in like a compilation video, it's so real. It's terrifying. It's one of those things that like used to keep me up at night. I've mellowed out now, but woof, scary times. I've just kind of accepted it, like 3 years from now, when I'm like a washed up shill, sold to the highest bidder, there's just going to be like whole compilation videos, like heliocentric 10 years ago, heliocentric now. Look at this schmuck.
The downfall of heliocentric video essay, 3.2 million views.
Whatever happened to this idiot YouTuber?
Who the fuck was that guy that we all watched back in the day? I feel like I've like just broadening my video horizons of like what I'm making in the early days, because I know that if I get known for one thing, then it's like you got to stay there. And I'm like,
yeah,
I don't know. And I also say so much ridiculous stuff on the internet that a clip compilation would be too easy to make. And everybody knows that I say ridiculous stuff. So part of me is like, if I broaden the base and say a bunch of crazy things, there's no like brand to uphold. There's no like polished version that's like dying in people's hearts and minds. Like,
that's so real. Oh man, dude, sometimes I go back and forth on like, just how screwy the internet is, and even being somebody who gets called authentic occasionally, it's like, I don't know, man. Sometimes I really have qualms about this whole venture. Like maybe I should just pull the plug on it, just go live out in the desert, just buy some land in West Virginia, call it a day.
I also feel like, do you ever had pastors do like the starfish on the beach sermon? Do you know that? I was explaining to friends, like, what is the point of all of this? And it's, like I said, like nothing matters. 20 million people is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But also like to get those random emails from time to time of people that like you forget that commenters aren't real and like views aren't real. But like when I get these long ass emails from people like multiple pages long that sometimes I'll have to throw into a ChatGPT summary to like figure out what was just said. And like, because it's a lot of emails, and people will trauma dump and tell their entire life story. I've had a few people send me like 10+ page documents. I want to be respectful and skim through, and to just like see their lives start and begin, and to avoid what I went through, and to see people move in the opposite direction and feel alive, and to have seen people over months on Discord. I just had a few people on June 1st that had been talking about coming out for a year since I first made the Discord, like finally do that. It's like, it's Jordan Peterson is dad of the internet. Like in some ways I was like, is this what like being an internet dad feels like at 22? Like maybe I never need to have kids because there's enough people on the internet. Like it's, even if this entire endeavor, there's like 5 people whose lives was made better. It's like, cool. Like that's worth it. And a few people who reconsidered, and maybe one trad Catholic who watched a video and like decided to not disown their child.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, that's enough. That's enough for me to keep going. But then to also not feel obligated to keep going. Because I think you see people go full time, and I've thought about going full time with this, but then they like have to maintain the views.
Yeah.
And like they have to play the game. And then they do more work, but they make less of an impact precisely because they have something to uphold. And they have an upload schedule, and they have to like think through things and like, oh, we're like throwing this out. And it's like,
Yeah.
I only ever want to make content that I'm proud of. And there are so many videos that I have in the scripting. I have a folder of scripts that haven't been made yet that I could all make by tomorrow, but I just like to let them sit and then randomly be like, now's the time to like brush that one off the shelf or finish editing. And like it feels authentic. And most of the videos I'll record like 3 or 4 times and then update and then change. And then it's like, I only want to make stuff that I'm proud of. And I think that's about all we can do is like be proud and happy in what we do. And hopefully it's making some good in the world. And that's about all that that you need.
Script? What is that word? Script? What is that?
A teleprompter?
You,
What is that?
You write something down and like plan what you're gonna say? That's weird.
Ugh. The TikTok brain.
I did 4 years of improv in college, and damn it, it's gonna rear its ugly head and be useful to me now. Damn it.
Also, my best performing video ever was no script and recorded in a random afternoon in one take. So it's like,
one take. Did you edit it?
I pulled out one pause to go to the bathroom and one really long silence. But yeah, it was all just
Wow.
one take, and that's been my video on coming out, and that just has been the highest performing video by a factor of like 6.
Wow.
And it was just,
Yeah.
I was in my car, like, talking to my notes app. And then I was like, oh, I'm not going to write a script. I'm just going to record. And then I talked for an hour, and that's it.
Well, I'm glad you did. Yeah. My modus operandi, like with all of my videos, it's just, I just talk and come up with what I'm going to say on the spot, and then edit it to hell so that it's somewhat viewable, tolerable.
That's the other thing I can never figure out is when I script videos, they convey my thoughts better, but they necessarily only apply to a smaller audience because they tend to get very technical and very niche when things are scripted.
Yeah.
And so they have a deeper impact, but the number of people that are going to understand like a Jordan Peterson, like How He Made Me an Atheist type of critique is like, even I was trying to explain concepts and I'm like, I'm not going to lie, there's probably like 10% of people that followed the argument.
Yeah.
Or some of my other videos where it's like, it's very technical. And like, I'm fine having it be technical. And I have a lot of people that have pushed to like make it more accessible. Even in like my Jordan Peterson debate, like it was very dense. And in my mind, it all made sense. And then also rewatching, I was like, most people don't even know what words were used in that. And so it's like, what is the, like, you get technical and you make an impact. You get less technical and you have a broader reach that also makes an impact. So like, what's the total length times width of impact to have the largest surface area possible of that like negotiated thing?
Do you give 1,000 people $1 or one person $1,000? It's the classic moral dilemma.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. I mean, I think that they're both important, right? Because, you establish rapport with yourself, to your people, letting them know like, hey, I'm able to do both. I'm able to, shoot the breeze on the surface level, or, dive deep into the soft white underbelly of this philosophical beast.
Yeah. I don't know. It's authentic. Where do you see your channel going in the next years? Is it going to keep doing church audits? Is it going to expand? Is it going to go deeper? Is it going to fade away as you get tired of you got to run out of churches at some point. There's only 30,000 in the U.S.
Well, do you know how many of those are in Raleigh alone?
Enough for a man to become a millionaire off of YouTube.
Here's to hoping, baby. No, there are 450 churches in Raleigh alone. So I could do this series every week for 9 years without ever doubling up on a church. Would I want to do that? Hell no. To the dismay of, a lot of my audience, I don't like going to church. It is boring. It is dull. It's not fun. I do it because it gives me like something to talk about with regards to religion. And this is kind of the dirty secret of my series, is that I don't particularly care about giving commentary on different denominations. It's just a relatable format that gives me kind of a springboard to talk about what I actually care about. And so, I'll do the church audits for another year or two. I think that's probably fair. The new dilemma with it, I have some ethical concerns about like, yeah, how kosher is it for me to like put this, little Baptist church on the corner on blast? It's like, yeah, the pastor said something stupid, but saying something stupid to a congregation of 50 people is different than, 20,000 people on the internet hearing it, or hearing about it. So I do have some ethical concerns there. In addition to that, I now get recognized. Probably every other church that I go to, somebody will walk up to me and they'll be like, "Oh my God, you're the guy." And in a sense, in some ways, that kind of ruins it for me, because I want to be treated like a nobody. And so I have honestly kind of, tossed around the idea of like pulling a Borat and finding some kind of like weird hokey disguise, a ridiculous top hat and a mustache. Maybe that'll be the thing. But, the reality is like, I've got some more music I need to make. That's really important to me. And all of that music is about theology and Jesus and life and death and faith. So I need to do that. And yeah, I think that there's still a large part of my story that I haven't told yet. And so figuring out the right medium to do that in, that's kind of on my horizons as well. So church hopping is still fun for now. I don't see an end in sight to that, but it won't be forever.
Do you get tired of people thinking that you're always about to convert? 'Cause you talk about, people often think that when you recognize any amount of good in religion, then it's just a matter of time before this person joins.
Right.
Do you just have those people reaching out like crazy, or in the comment sections, like guessing the trajectory of your life and informing other people how to treat you?
Yeah. I don't read the comments much anymore. I probably shouldn't say that, because then I'll get less comments and then my videos will go less viral. Ugh. Fuck virality. But I occasionally get emails of people, kind of overstepping that line. And it's like, dude, I've never met you. You do not have the right to impose yourself into my story like this, or to, psychoanalyze me from afar. You have not established that level of rapport with me yet for this to be okay. If it's a person, I don't want to scare my audience away from like emailing me, their story. But, when it's making definitive claims about who you think I am, it feels kind of icky. But I think that, with regards to religion, I think that for a lot of people, it's like they know how this story goes, because it's, to use Petersonian language, it's a meta-narrative that they're well familiarized with. It's the C.S. Lewis story. It's the Lee Strobel story of, the guy who goes and investigates all the religions, and but just that Jesus figure. I just keep coming back to him. And I think that there's a real mold that people try to cram my story into. And on some days it's fun to just blue ball them And, you know, like, oh, maybe I'm going to do it. Maybe not so quick. But at the same time, it's like, no, I know you think you know how this story goes, but I'm genuinely really convinced that it's not true. And I think that for some people who are less well-read in theology, who are less well-read in the early church and in the early Christian documents, I think that when you're a little bit farther removed from it, you let your heart just kind of leap onto it, and it's like, I'll figure out the specifics later. I'll figure out, you know, how this all makes sense later, but like right now, my heart is screaming that this is true. And there's days that I've felt that, but I know that it's not true. And to kind of offer a parallel example, I think about this all the time. I've never told my audience this, but I've been to Jonestown. I went there. I flew to South America, flew to Guyana, and then took an island hopper, a tiny little plane out in the middle of the jungle. You know, paid some dude $20 to drive me out to the actual site where it happened. You know, we hacked through the woods with machetes, and we went and investigated the Jonestown site, where 1,000 people drank the Kool-Aid for a man that they believed was God. And some of those people, you can hear the recordings, they believed, and they thought it was beautiful. And they were wrong. And it's hard to really believe that something is beautiful and believe that it's not true.
That's the side to things that I never... It's really hard to talk to somebody who is metaphorically just starting to drink the Kool-Aid, especially in the rad trad world, where like, I know that there's nothing that I can communicate to you about what I've seen. Where like it takes those seeing the carnage types of moments that you're not going to find at your local parish, but you're going to find on the corners of the internet, or those long emails, or those personal stories where like the pastor at the fraternity parish that I went to is now in federal prison. Like it takes those types of stories, and it's almost like, and I've talked to some of these younger converts, and younger, I'm all of 22, so I don't mean to sound like an old man, but it's like there's nothing that I can do to tell you right now that like damper it. There is nothing that I can communicate to you, because you have a way through which you can understand any sort of criticism, that you can brush off anything with an overriding meta-narrative around how people deconvert, or that church hurt. It doesn't actually reflect on ontological claims. Like it's everything's deflected, and there's just nothing that can happen. But then it's interesting when they try to talk to me, and I've had a few people that offline in real life like to start talking to me about religion, and then they realize like half an hour in that like they're so new to this. And it's a weird feeling when I first started making content, where specifically on homosexuality, like I'd ask for better arguments. Yeah. And I realized that like there just aren't any more arguments. It's not that there's other bad arguments. It's that I've read all of them. Like whatever tactic that they think that they've workshopped because they just read this book. It's like, I've read that book. I've read that other book. Yeah. I've listened to that talk. I've heard that argument. That in a certain sense, there's nothing new about Catholicism that I'm going to find out. There might be new variations of things. And so to talk to somebody whose life is being transformed by this thing, that they think that they found the pinnacle of benefits from a society, and they start using these arguments where it's like, listen, man, like there is nothing you can say to me that's going to be new. Like I've seen what I've seen, and I've read all of the arguments, and you're just not going to change anything about me. And in a weird way, they like stop pressing after that. I don't know if it's specifically a rad trad thing, where I've seen a lot of like Protestant Christians, they will keep going on and on about their testimony. versus rad trads tend to have this like focus on apologetics and argumentation. And once they know that you've outclassed them at argumentation, they stop talking about their faith. It's a fascinating thing in person, offline, when I'll quote something that's like more nodes down the logic tree than they understand. And then all of a sudden they become a person again. Like they stop the like running the script in their head because they know it's not going to end well. But yet they want to keep their faith intact. And I'm not here to tell them what to think. And they just kind of like stop trying to be religious. And they're just like a normal person when they realize that they don't have to maintain an appearance because I know what it's like. They don't have to think of the argument. They don't have to think of like the perfect time to say like the right thing that the Holy Spirit told them. It's just like, I've studied this more than you. And like, it sounds arrogant, but you're not going to do anything. Like, so just be a human being around me. Like, I know the trick. I've seen how the magic trick works. And so I can be delighted when I see other people like enjoy the magic trick. And I can admire the skill that it takes for this magician to pull off the trick. And it can be fun to look at how other magic tricks are done.
Right.
And it can be fun. But like, you're never going to convince me that like the magician pulled a goldfish out of his hat. Like, I know how it's done. It might be fun and it's entertaining and I talk about it, but like I've seen where the fish comes from in the trick. And there's no new angle you can show me of the magic trick that's going to make me forget like I know how the trick works. Like,
right. No, that's a good analogy. Man, it's funny because when I have similar conversations like that, you know, I sometimes talk to some of these younger Christians that I'll meet, and you know, they're sometimes like eager to talk to me about, or you know, usually I'll ask them like, oh, like, do you go to church? Like, you go to that church? Oh, dude, I've been to some like really solid that kind of church. Like, yeah, and you know, I'll start talking to them about it, and I'll be like, you know, like, yeah, tell me more. Like, oh, dude, is your pastor like, does he think women can preach? Oh, interesting. Yeah, I've heard. You know, like it's a really interesting discussion, and I think that it's like unnerving to them when like somebody who doesn't believe in any of it is like, one, not threatened by the conversation, like. And two, like, just interested in it, right? But then, you know, for a little while, I have to like really stress, like, yeah, like I'm not a believer, but you know, like I'm, you know, rooting on for my friends who are holding down the fort for the, you know, Christendom. And it takes a little while, but like once they kind of like get the gist of what I'm doing and who I am, they're like, oh, okay, fucking weirdo, but okay. And you know, some of those people are enjoyable friends now.
Yeah, one of my business clients,
Is it Kyle?
Business? No.
Okay.
He was talking about some documentary and he was talking about faith, and I made like a supportive comment about his religion. And then like it was like blood in the water where he was like, oh, this is like somebody who believes with me or is about to believe. And then he kept asking me questions in a very like Jordan Peterson way. I just like threw all of the big words at him to the point where it was just like, I have two modes of conversation, like investigating somebody's belief in real life, or if they press me, then it's just like go so drastically over their head that they don't know what to do with it are my two. Like I'm just like not interested in talking about religion as like a debate topic in real life. And so that's either you get me like supportive of your religion, or when you push me, then you're going to get more big words than you know what to deal with. And so this client, I still talk to him and he loves talking. I threw the kitchen sink of big words at him. He didn't comprehend. He pointed me to the pastor of his church who's getting a PhD in epistemology. And like my central thesis for leaving Catholicism is that I never found an epistemology to sufficiently ground dogmatic theology, which is just like, nobody knows how to talk about that. And talking to this pastor who has he's working on his PhD specifically in epistemology. And I was walking in like expecting something new. And then I was talking to this guy who's working on his PhD, and I was like I've ran out of new arguments to see and like new ideas and new concepts. And so talking to him, he also kind of like back down. At first, he was asking me questions on my own story. He's like, "Ooh, story, meta narratives. Like we can like figure out how to shoehorn religion in here." And then he asked a technical question that just went. He's like, "Oh shit! Like we went from like on the ground to like 30,000 feet." And like talking to him is fun because it's like there's nothing new that he's gonna do.
Yeah.
I was asked on the Jubilee follow-up podcast when Peterson was like, "Oh, I'm sure your aims are off in the first place." The guy kept trying to get me to admit that I got emotional when Peterson told me that, and he asked me the question like 4 times in a row. I was like, "No, like I know what happened with my own story. Like other people mischaracterizing it, like it can be annoying, but I don't feel threatened." Like, I know that Jordan Peterson doesn't know my story. In fact, if he wants to get into my story, like, it would look worse for him. And, like, talking to religious fundamentalists or people that are extremely right-wing, like, I no longer feel threatened or this need to, like, reflexively, like, jump into a conversation. Because it's like, I know the arguments. I know where this is going. I know there's nothing new that they're going to bring to the table. So you can kind of, like, play with the ideas and toy with the ideas in a way that to the outside world's like, why are you talking to these people? And it's like, I don't know, it's fun. I'm not threatened. I know that the arguments are kind of bullshit at the end of the day. And so I'm having fun and not threatened at all by them now. It's
Right.
like a fun, and I've seen people so massively mischaracterize my own story that it's almost like laughably bad, where they'll get the timeline wrong, the states wrong, every conceivable thing about my story that could be wrong. They will find a way to make it wrong. And it's like, that's cute, man. Like, you need to, like, flip my story around to, like, fit your own narrative around why people leave. Like, I'm not threatened by your inability to listen.
I've actively, like originally it was kind of a soft stance, but as the years have gone on, more and more I've made it almost like a fairly hard line in the sand, that like I don't talk about why I deconverted, because I don't relish the idea of like people trying to shoehorn me into, like, oh, he read this book and this was the reason why. But everyone knows that this idiotic, moronic book has been debunked 12 times by reputable Christian scholars. I don't want to be a part of a discussion like that. I don't want to be dismissed like that. And so I'd rather just sidestep the whole thing and like, no, I just don't think it's true. Like I'm not making an argument. I'm not, what is it that they say in debate? Who has like I'm not holding the burden of proof over here because I'm not, making a definitive argument for why you ought to be an atheist. I don't think it's true. Sorry. And then asking Christians like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? You're hanging out with somebody who genuinely thinks that your faith isn't real and it's not true, and you can't pinpoint the one thing that you can try to fix about them. Are you going to love me? Are you going to, treat me like Jesus, like you say you should? What are you going to do, man? Chips are on the table. There's no easy out.
A lot of my closest friends are, especially in the business world, the rate of like conservative Christians in the business world that own businesses is like through the roof.
Yeah.
And so all of my peers across the country, we gather a ton to do a lot of business discussions. And then like they eventually found out this like ex-religious side to me. And like the first few times they met, they had no clue because I'm a master at making descriptive claims. And like I don't like talking about religion. And then they figured it out. And then in like the course of one night, they went from not knowing to like trying to convert to like asking questions after they realized things weren't going to happen. And from time to time, they like to try to bring up a conversation. And it's fascinating watching people like approach a conversation where they get weirded out by having time to talk. Right, when I ask a very open-ended question, I'm not waiting for the gotcha. It's interesting, like watching them keep looking back. Like, is this the right track? Like I'm not here to think about anything.
Yeah.
Or they'll ask, especially on culture war questions around being queer. Somebody was like super worked up about preferred pronouns, and then like halfway through the conversation, I was like, "You realize you've been using they them pronouns this whole time to talk about a hypothetical," and it was one person, and he just had like the lights like half an hour into this discussion to realize he's been using singular they them pronouns this whole time. And like I just had to like say it, I was like, so they them can be used for people in a singular sense? And it was just like his whole mind went, oh. And I wasn't like, I'm gonna dunk on you or like gloating. It was just like, And he's just like, all of the gears grinded to a halt when he realized that just by thinking about these issues, like he changed his mind on the issue. And I was like, So
That's the stuff dreams are made of. Gosh, man.
But I'm excited for some of my audience to come and watch your content. I'm sure the Rad Trads, I saw your Rad Trad video doing really well compared to some of the past ones. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see where the new, younger dialogue and discourse about religion goes on the internet. I am glad to have you on board. Hopefully I'm making the whole conversation on the internet better as well. And we need more people in the space doing what you and I have done, which is talking about religion, not from this outside, like, liberal think tank perspective, but like somebody who knows the characters and knows the plot and knows the arguments and has some credibility. I'm grateful to have people like you out there making content.
I really appreciate it, man. And hopefully people who know that, the people in there are people. Good, complicated, bad, fun, weird people.
Yeah.
So, Kate, I endlessly appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for having me on, shooting the shit with me. It's been really good.
It has been a blast. This is now my longest single podcast recording.
Let's go!
Like maybe an hour. My only longer episode is 3.5 hours, which was actually 2 parts that I combined into one. It was this 21-page document purporting to be able to bring somebody from agnosticism to Catholicism, like every step along the way. And I had a friend of mine who's never been religious, like, react to it at the same time. So he was bringing the, like, thinking through it side and, like, not knowing the steps. And then I was bringing the, like, the technical side. So it was a fun 3.5-hour conversation. But that was, like, 2 parts. It's like, I can't separate this. Like, if I clip this up, then I'm going to get, like, well, you should have gone to, like, this step. And I was like, we already did that step. Or, like, well, it was purporting to prove this thing. It's like, no, it has to be an omnibus. But you have the record by almost triple for the longest single podcast conversation. And it has flown by. So it's been a blast getting to talk to you. And
I expect my trophy in the mail. Yes,
I can send you a blank fee for your appearance here. A blank check.
A blank check? All right.
Blank check.
I'm gonna put 2 figures on that check.
We can split the $10 in AdSense.
Yes. That's all I've ever wanted. Awesome.
Everybody listening, go to Heliocentric, or if you're listening here and want to support this work, hit up that Patreon, hit up that Discord that I've already shilled for, and I don't know, go touch grass and make this the last Atheism podcast that you listen to today. I have other content. Don't listen to it today. That's for next week. Go out there and touch grass and have friends and do something besides listen to just 3-hour conversations, because they're a blast. But like, Jared and I are not as cool as like your family and friends.
It's true. It's true. Call your Aunt Ruthie, dear listener. I bet you have a great Aunt Ruthie.
Feel really called out by that and actually has an aunt named that. Statistically speaking, somebody has to have an aunt named that who's listening, and they're going to have done just a massive double take right now. Everybody else is going to be like, oh, funny joke. And one person's going to be panicking right now.
How did he know?
How did he know?
Oh, man.
It's been a blast having you on. I think this will be one of many conversations. This is a small corner of the internet, and thanks for being on.
My pleasure, man.